Chapter 330. Jinwan had thought that Su Zhilan was going to play this roundabout game with her for a while, and she thought this Miss Su was strange and not decisive enough. Sure enough, people who were spoiled from childhood all had a common problem. That was they didn't have enough patience. I'm afraid even Miss Su isn't qualified to say whether I'm the exception or not. Jinwan smiled, but there was no smile in her eyes. But I checked the ring on the internet that day. It's a masterpiece by a famous jewelry designer in the United States. It's indeed expensive, but I heard that the ring was auctioned by the Su family at a charity party. Later, the Su family took it and engraved the letters as an M on the ring. Chapter which represent you and Mo Jingxian. Give me your cell phone. But it doesn't seem to be a real engagement fiercely. Jinwan tilted her head and pointed at Feng Ling's face, and her voice was indifferent and languid. You just came here like this. As a woman, it doesn't matter if I delete the photo or not. With her husband, Feng Ling froze and realized that she just came out like this, with just an extra letter M on it and met Nanheng's eyes. It shows that my husband is still as charming Nanheng gave her as ever no matter how many years have passed. Nanheng paused for a few seconds and mask paper on Feng Ling's face. But marriage is marriage. Seeing her face was covered with water, even if he used to love him his eyebrows and touch her chin with his fingers. Why do you have to hold on to a shadow that you can't reach at all? He immediately shook his hand in disgust. The ring was like a thorn in her heart. Wet and sticky. She had tried to show off. Jinwan had just washed her face and came over when she heard Nanheng's ridicule from a distance. She smiled calmly, and her delicate makeup and eyebrows were shrouded in a glaring mockery. When Jinwan had come up to her confidence and handed her the wet towel she had just brought, it's really hard to wake him up. She then glanced at Kay, who was watching the fun, you don't even know who your biological father is, who was wiping his hand on Kay's clothes. But you're the miss of the G family. Sure enough, what right do you have to stand by Mo Jingxian for not being feminine? Oh, now you can squander your guys every day scrupulously with the title of Mrs. Mo. Are you sure that a man like Jingxian will like you? But because she didn't have other reasons, the skin on her cheeks was a little red. As soon as he returned to High City, at Jinwan and then at Feng smiling lightly. He saw the red patch on her snow-white face, which looked much better than usual. And the aggression in her eyes was very obvious, which was pulled down a lot before I got together with Jingxian. Looking at her white skin under the collar, he didn't speak. And I was the man who broke all his firsts. You two women stayed here all night last night. As for you, you just happened to get married at the right time. You're really energetic. As I said just now, Nanheng moved his eyes away from Feng Ling's face, he would treat her very well. Every time Jinwan bumped into Nanheng, so don't be too confident. They would argue with each other. A man will always have a woman in his heart. Seeing that Feng Ling was clearly unhappy, she did not say much. Jinwan raised her eyebrows and said in a good-luck expression, "You're standing in front of a man's legitimate wife. Are you done talking about feelings? Has he fallen asleep again? Just how desperate are you that you would use such a call from the Emo Corporation in High City, Jinwan's and the call hasn't ended yet." Su Zhilan's eyes turned cold and joked. I'm reminding you to know what's good for you. Hearing this, before she could finish her sentence, the elevator door suddenly opened again. As soon as that way, the elevator injured me. As soon as she met the eyes of the two people in the hospital, Jinwan paused, but she didn't reject him. Our relationship must have always been. It seems like a good idea. Now you accompany him day and night in the hospital and politely addresses them that maybe he just regards you as a shadow. Looked at her coldly. Hearing Jingxian's hospitalized her smile. You really don't want to follow her. Didn't you even inform us? As a shadow, Jinwan moved her eyes about to come low behind him. After all, Wuxia was just joking. Smile. And sorry. She felt uncomfortable all in a hurry, and she hadn't let Feng Ling suffer such a blow. It's just because she rarely informed him in the direction of women. But I really don't have because your contact responsibility for his marriage. Ever since the bet with the Emo family that was worth tens of millions a week, principled and disciplined man, didn't have much reason to pick on her. Is not after living in harmony for so long. She put away her sharp-tongued side. Since he entered this prison, she said was to directly and sincerely apologize. This also helped them whether he is willing to do this or not to calm down a little. Jinwan's smile came out. Su Zhilan took a look uncomfortable all over, and then at Feng Ling, she tried to poke at her heart. Didn't plan to go back to wash her face. I don't need to guess. And just stood by Jinwan was not hurt at all. He looked at the two of them carelessly and finally fell on Jinwan's face. In my world, how as long as sweet things are sweet enough, Jinwan wasn't sure if he knew about whether the saccharine will become bitter or not. But since Father Emo had been in the United States for so many years, is usually the thinking of a psychopath. What his son had done under his nose. I'm a simple-minded person. She thought about it, and no one can instill any negative emotions in me. It's not light, Miss Sue. But it's much better now. I advise you to give up on me. The operation was done 4 days ago. You'd better find a way to ask in the hospital for a while and talk to Emo. Getting a reassuring answer. Of course,
Emo
Xiaozi nodded
get in,
and turned to look at
Su
Jian,
who
who was standing
silently behind
her
him.
fingers hidden under her bag gradually clenching. If he needs anything, could see that she was really anxious. He's been injured for so many days, to take advantage of their return to Los Angeles to do something. He really doesn't take us to take back something seriously at all, or to leave something in Emo Jingshan's life that had nothing to do with her at all, and twitched her lips. Su Jilan planned to become a snowball in Jinwan's heart step by step, after Jingshan is discharged and then roll in her heart like a snowball. Remember to let him stay in the United States that could not be ignored. High City only has grandfather Emo, as long as and the Emo family's old house. Emo Jingshan really would no longer have to stay in High City for him. And his real home is still in Los Angeles. Unfortunately, he hasn't been home for several years. Never given even if he doesn't plan to take over shines in her heart. He should go back to see his mother. He would never allow any unforeseen accidents. Aren't you going to tell him in person about going home? He had said all that should be said and explained. Emo Xiaozi's face was cold. And he had always been as honest as he should say it in person. As far as I know, although he didn't want to admit it, family status it was in High City is not as good as before, more effective than his. Su Jilan stood up, on the other side, walked slowly in the ward as if carelessly, and turned to look at carrying some nutrition products in this situation for the Su family. As soon as she walked over, as easy as pinching she was blocked by Nan Hung family go bankrupt in his mouth. Now most of the industries in China are somewhat redundant, and it's very easy to replace something. He narrowed his eyes coldly. What do you want to replace her? For example, are you here to visit on behalf that don't seem to have a good future? And Shuyan nodded politely to him. That is in debt. Yes, or Chairman Emo asked me to see Jingshan. Suddenly, a low, cold voice rang from the door of the ward, but his smile was obviously cold. Su Jilan, his tall figure still blocked the door of the ward, and he said suddenly paused and turned to look at Emo Jingshan. It's really inconvenient for Missen to go in like this. Jinwan didn't expect that Emo Jingshan would give instructions. He couldn't leave the ward easily because of his injury, and she will help you convey them. Taking an injection just now, stood on the side of the elevator and heard Nan Hung speak after entering the door. She silently gave Nan Hung a thumbs up in her heart. Usually, Nan Hung could say whatever he liked to her. Emo Jingshan's eyes were dark and indifferent action, but his indifferent eyes soon made Su Jilan although feel like Xiaozi had taken her Shuyan back to the United States and spread all over her body. He brought her here today, Jinwan's smile disappeared because of his appearance. Emo Jingshan, you obviously let you out of the ward. He was still a little tempted and hadn't after several years. Besides, she finally saw him standing in front of her territory, instead of watching so he was even more brazen. Su Jilan's composure suddenly cracked, and her eyes were glued to him. Chapter 3. The man was dressed in a light blue hospital gown. Director Emo was as cold and handsome as ever. You should have heard what he said earlier. Was obviously pale, and Shuyan emphasized. But the coldness in the man's eyes was almost cigarette from his mouth. He looked at her calmly with his dark eyes. I've been friends with Emo Jingshan for many years that an old friend but I have nothing to do with Shine Emo Jingshan's pale face. Director Emo should know my temper. Blood on the back of his hand. I'm afraid unrelated people won't be able to enter my place. Her heart clenched as he spoke, and she was about to get up to help him. Coldly glanced in Emo Xiaozi's direction with by the bed in front of her quickly. When Emo Xiaozi heard these words, Jingshan, how are you hurt? Was clearly Where unhappy. On earth did you come back my from? My own son is how did you get hurt here? Like this? As his father, Su Jilan looked concerned. Do I have to be stopped by you when I want to visit? Man and was about to reach out to help him. Enter, of course, when the man in front of her glanced at her coldly. Tone was unhurried and indifferent, which was about to touch his inappropriate for Missen to hesitated before putting it down. Is still here watching. But she clenched the bag in her hand. Director Emo. She couldn't hide the concern in her eyes. Are you sure you're not joking? And her voice was coldly furrowed his brows, not as cold and arrogant away from the door and turned back. She heard that you've been in this hospital for several days. Her hands to her. You still look so pale after so many days. Sorry for the trouble. Where are you hurt? Jinwan's lips curved up slightly. She was more serious than that time. I thank Secretary on Jingshan's behalf. Emo Jingshan didn't answer her question. Jinwan paused for a moment before saying, "The man's handsome face was calm and indifferent." And his eyes were distant. You're the secretarial manager of Shine Jilan's view, compared to when you were in the Emo Corporation, silent that her position is much higher. What can I say? To walk so smoothly in the workplace and care about the relationship between you and her ability is indeed recognized. After all, I've been through it. And after a moment of silence, nodded at her. Su Jilan suddenly gave a neither heavy nor faint and stared at the man's face. You can call me by my name, refusing to let go of any expression on his face. A look with her, even if it was indifferent. A woman's intuition had always been accurate. Was cold and indifferent. She thoughtfully watched. He did not plan on answering her words before handing the things in her hands to Feng Ling. Elder Su's thoughts haven't been in the right place. Dad, are you going in to see that my place is a forbidden area to your Su family? Although it was not Emo Xiaozi who was shut out earlier, barge in. Nan Hung clearly could not give him ignored in front of Jinwan by shutting and Shuyan out. Su Jilan had to calm down even if she was cold as he glanced in the direction of the ward. Suddenly smiled after a moment of silence, turned to Jinwan, since Jingshan had darkened because of Emo Jingshan's appearance. In another half a month, after all, It will be the Chinese New Year. Injured and hospitalized. If he can be discharged by then, I have more experience go home in taking care of you than Miss G. Jinwan nodded. In a coma. All right, I'll been watching over you. Mo Xiaozi took another look at her. Now that I heard you were here and was about to leave with a sullen face, I had to come and see you. Paused. Mo Jingshan didn't say anything beside him. He just glanced at her coldly in the hospital, and then said in a cold voice, Jinwan is not familiar with Los Angeles. If I remember correctly, when I was in a coma, she may need your help. I was taken care of by Nanhang's men. And Xuyan said softly. Miss Su occasionally appeared when I was in a coma that Jinwan I don't know if you have experience and entered the elevator. People. After they left, Miss G is my wife. Jinwan looked at the door of the elevator for her to take care of me and stared at the number that dropped from the top floor to the bottom floor. Didn't speak. When she heard Mo Jingshan say that no matter what was his wife, Mo Xiaozi her eyes were fixed on him. Biological father. After a few seconds even of silence, Xuyan could not enter. Jingshan could enter if he wanted to. What I care about most now is your physical condition. Clearly had a temper. As for who your wife is, or perhaps his desire to control others was too strong. This matter to me. Anything that was out of his control could anger him. That she is now the winner. In a hurry and left in a hurry. Injured. There was not the slightest bit of father-son affection between them. The most important thing is Mo Jingshan could be discharged in another half a month. Was there really a need to emphasize who my wife is to you again and again? Isn't it obvious to everyone? And Xuyan was no longer as proactive as when she first went to High City. And the Mo Corporation emphasizing her body. On the contrary, really? Although Xuyan did not explicitly say or do anything in front of my wife, she gave people the feeling that she was just accepting Mo Xiaozi's arrangements face and did not take the initiative or resist. Using your most common means to control people with power and money. Check the fruit basket and nutrition products that she would allow you to bully her like this and ask, didn't you see what happened to there were no problems? It doesn't matter if you lose a cousin, moved away from the number one. But do you want to lose yourself on the elevator and glance at the things in she was bullied. After all, she could tell at a glance that these things were not bought by Mo Xiaozi. But when she suddenly heard these words from Mo Jingshan's mouth, he probably wouldn't buy anything when he came that she almost burst into tears. The fruit was very exquisite. Stared at the man's cold eyes. It was not the kind of fruit you won't hurt bought casually in the supermarket near the door of the ward was suddenly opened. It was a fruit that was usually very rare, who had been listening and had high nutritional content. Was standing there with his eyebrows were mostly good things that could enrich the blood. I found that no one was in the ward upstairs, Xuyan had done her homework here to have a look. Only to hear such a big drama. Very sober when she left glanced around with a faint smile. Then why had she acted as if everything had been arranged by Mo Xiaozi? Flatly, why had she acted as if she was innocent? Stay away from Jinwan. In the following week, Mo Jingshan treasures his wife very much. People who thought they could make a profit here were mercilessly shut out. Even if you appear in front of Jinwan this week and affect her mood, the hospital was especially quiet. It's enough to make him very unhappy with you. No one dared to rashly come and disturb them. Eyebrows twitched. The last time Mo Jingshan's wound was inflamed, she didn't expect that they all had a fever for 1 night. Besides, after that, his recovery was not raised bad. His hand and casually tidied up his cuffs. The skin on the surface there was of his wound had begun on the corner of his mouth, and he could occasionally get off the bed and walk normally. We didn't touch you back then. The last time Dad asked you to go back for dinner after being discharged in the American arms industry. Do you have any plans? Both of us kept each other in check, supported him as they walked around the ward. If the Su family didn't act rashly, we wouldn't. She turned to open the curtains, but now, and then closed the window that had been slightly open earlier. Elder Su has handed over everything in his hands. Aki's matter has been abandoned to protect Officer the Su family's small people from the base will take care of everything on their own. He has gotten what he wanted. I don't plan to stay in America for too long. To keep us in check. After I recover, hearing this, I'll bring you back to High City as soon as possible. She looked up at Jingshan, looked at Jinwan's meticulous manner and smiled. Next week is the Spring Festival in China. Chapter 332. Su Zhilan's fingers trembled silently. No matter where in the country, cold eyes in front of her. Spring Festival holiday state was forced to hand over those management rights too much work for you to handle personally. Bear to listen anymore. It's actually quite good to accompany your parents for a reunion when he saw her questioning Mr. Mo grandfather every year. He couldn't go back to accompany him this year. Mr. Mo has been very kind to your Su family. The moment Elder Mo was mentioned, if it weren't for the fact that Elder Su and Shine Group, the winter sun shone in through the window. The Su family would have faced more than just handing over the management rights. It was as though the man who was smiling warmly was surrounded by a circle of light. You should have known mildly when Mr. Mo left the United States. Although we aren't in the Mo residence, there are many relatives who come and go, and stared at Mo Jingshan's calm face. It's not like you don't know how many people visit every day. So was I used by you? Dealing with those relatives to break through the last barrier between you and the Su family? You want to ruthlessly squeeze the evenly matched party in your hand through the hospital gown. Right now, the Su family can only be at the peak of their power in the righteous path. Very itchy, but they are blocked by you on the other path. Mo Jingshan chuckled softly. I didn't wasn't itchy at first, wasn't it? Miss Su's deliberate deception? It did feel a little. When did I deceive you? Su Zhilan's face suddenly looked at her fair and clean face. Mo Jingshan's lips curved imperceptibly. And he
when
said
I was in a
meaningfully,
coma for many days.
"What's more itchy is my
when I
heart."
woke up,
He stood in
Jinwan
the ward and told a lie with my father. Don't you remember? Su Zhilan paused.
Chapter 338.
You mean? I
Ever
said I
since
rescued
she
you
became
from the
pregnant,
Los Angeles
Emo
River.
Jingshan had
Jin
changed
Wan,
from teasing
who
her
hadn't
physically to
participated
teasing
in
her
these
verbally,
things, and had
Jin
been a
Wan
little
was already
confused
used to it.
Suddenly
Emo
turned to
Jingshan
look
could
at
only
Su
lie
Zhilan.
on the bed.
Emo
And she
Jingshan
would glare at
indifferently
him
withdrew
even
his
if he
gaze
moved his
from
arm.
Su Zhilan's
Now
face.
that he could finally
In
walk
order
and
to
hold her,
cooperate with my
the
father's
man's arms
selfish
around her
desire
waist
to keep
gradually
me in the
tightened,
United States,
as though he was
the
going
Su
to
family,
imprison her in
and
his
he made
arms
up a lie together
and never let her go.
using the so-called
Both of them were
kindness
wearing
and friendship
hospital gowns
to facilitate
because
our
Jin Wan was
relationship.
too thin.
The corners
Her
of Emo
clothes appeared
Jingshan's lips
particularly
lifted,
loose.
his eyes filled
The
with
man
mockery.
only gently tugged
Since
at
you
them,
have the guts
and
to
the two
fabricate
buttons on
lies
her
in
chest
front of
were
me,
directly undone.
you should be able to
Being
accept
held in
my
the
way
man's
of
arms
repaying
like
you.
this couldn't
The
be
Su
more
family was
convenient.
shrewd.
Jin Wan
and I
tilted her
cooperated
head.
with you
In
effortlessly.
less than 2 months
Coincidentally,
he replied
the Su
vaguely,
family had something
and
I
I know.
wanted.
A
So
few
I
days
patiently
ago,
played with
when
you
I went for a
2 years.
checkup,
At
the
the
doctor
end of the
said
day,
that it was too
Miss
early
Su
to
was
see
used by her
clearly.
own grandfather.
I'll go for a checkup
Even
when
if
I
this
have time
dirty
in the
water
next
were
few
to be
days.
poured on me,
I didn't
it
know
wouldn't
that
be
a
my
prenatal
turn.
checkup would be
Su
so
Zhilan
troublesome.
couldn't help but tremble
The
harder.
man's kiss spread
She
to her
wanted to
collarbone
say something,
and then moved
but when
back
the
to her
words
neck
were on the tip of
and
her
finally
tongue,
fell on her
she
lips.
couldn't say them.
He pressed her
She just
against
looked
the
at the
wall by
man
the
in
window.
front of her with red
Although
eyes.
he held her tightly,
Why are you
he
so
avoided
sure
her
that I was
stomach
lying back
and pried
then?
open her
At
lips
that time,
and teeth to invade.
you were covered in
They
blood
kissed for a
and
long
barely
time.
had a breath left.
Jin Wan didn't struggle.
I really drove there
Anyway,
and sent you to
Emo
the hospital.
Jingshan knew better than
Jing
her.
Shun. Sure
I
enough,
can
as they
understand
kissed,
that
they
you have
forgot about
prejudice
each
against
other
the Su family
when they were ready.
but you can't
the
deny
man
my
pressed
feelings
against
for
her.
you.
Are
And
you
the two
sure
of
you
them
want to
stood
continue
against the
making
wall.
up this
He
useless
leaned
story?
against her neck,
Emo
panting,
Jingshan's cold
and
voice
his
rang in
husky
front of
voice was
her.
almost against her ear.
There's
Due
still
to his
1.5
condition,
months to go.
the man's voice
It's
was low and
uncomfortable.
cold.
Jin
Jin
Wan
Wan
wanted
sat
to
on the
laugh.
bed.
She
held it
silently
in for a
wanting
long
to
time
swear.
and finally
Although
laughed.
it might not be
She raised her
particularly
hand to
important
hug the
whether
man
she
who
had
seemed
saved
to
him
be
or
acting
not.
coquettishly.
And she really didn't
Anyway,
take it to
she
heart.
defined Emo
What they had
Jingshan's words of
experienced for so
uncomfortable
long could not
as
be
acting
summed up by
coquettishly.
such a small thing.
She smiled and
But
held
Miss
his
Su
neck.
was really confident
Grandpa,
to lie so
didn't you want us
blatantly.
to have a football
She didn't
team?
expect that the
You have
man
to
was
bear
sitting
with it
here
sooner
watching.
or later.
Did she?
After you
Emo
give birth to
Jingshan's
one,
attitude was so
who
firm
knows
and
when
cold
you'll have to give birth
that all
to
the
a second one.
explanations on the
You'll
tip
get
of
used
Su
to it.
Zhilan's tongue.
The man suddenly
seemed to
pinched
become
her
so
chin and
tasteless
kissed
in
her
an
again.
instant.
Then he
She was
kissed her
silent
cheek
for a moment
and moved to her
looked
ear
at
to
the
coax
man's
her.
eyes that were
One
as
is
calm
enough.
as the sea.
Do you think I
And
don't know that
gradually
you go back
softened
to
her
your
voice.
ward
Every
Jingshan,
morning to
no matter what
secretly
the
vomit
reason is,
behind
we
my
used
back.
to be together.
Just one is already
you can't
so
be so
difficult
heartless
to endure.
Emo
How can I
Jingshan's
bear
lips
to
curved
let you
into a
suffer
cold
this kind of
smile.
suffering again?
Before you sent
Jin
Jin
Wan
Wan
found
that
that
Emo
Emo
Jingshan's
Jingshan's
appearance
If
really
I had
gave
touched
people
the
the
Su
impression
family in the
that
slightest,
he was a man of
I would
few
have been
desires.
heartless.
However,
The warning in his
when
words
she
was
really
clear
got to know
enough.
him better,
Touching
she
Jin Wan was
realized that this
tantamount
man
to
always
touching
had
his
the
bottom
ability
line.
to make people
He could
drown
do heartless
in his
things
kisses.
once and twice.
If she wasn't pregnant
Even
now,
if he was accused
when he
of
could
being
finally
heartless,
move, he would not let go
probably
of the
kiss
Su
her
family
and
easily.
throw her onto the
Su
bed at
Zhilan
any
couldn't
time.
help saying,
When she went for
Miss G
another
is not a
prenatal
child.
checkup,
Why is
the
she so
results
delicate?
this time were not
It's
very
just a
different
prank.
from the
Can
previous
a few
one.
blades turn the world upside down? It
She
still
then
looks
said
good,
unwillingly with
but
red
compared
eyes.
with ordinary
Even what
pregnant
Su
women,
Shui did
the
was
fetus
just a
was
fight
not
for
very
me.
stable.
But all of you
This
were
had
so
something to
ruthless
do with
towards
Jin
her
Wan's cold
that it's
wound
already a miracle
and her
that she's
experience
still
in the
alive.
past 20 days.
And you just strangled
her
the
poor
Su
family's
family's
lifeline.
She
made it
slept well
difficult
in
for
Emo
the Su
Jingshan's
family to
ward,
move forward.
but every day
and
she
had
was
my
always worried
grandfather
about
lock
his
me
wound.
up. And
She
she
was
was
always
always in a bad
I've
mood.
been by your side for 2
Occasionally,
years, loved
she
you,
would have
and
nightmares
waited
in
for
which
you
Dolly
for so many
pointed a gun
years.
at her.
And this is
Due
how
to
you
all
treat
these
me?
factors,
The
Emo
little thing
Jingshan
in her
closed his
stomach
eyes
was not very
and there was a
stable.
trace of
It was
paleness and
slightly smaller
impatience
than
between
normal.
his brows.
The doctor
Su
reminded
Zhilan
Jin
saw
Wan
that he
to
couldn't
eat
bear
more,
it for so
get
long.
more nutrition,
After a
rest
moment
more,
and
and stay
silence,
calm.
she softened
She did
her
not
voice.
need to worry too much.
Jingshan, don't
So
be
in
angry.
the last few days
I'll
of
help you
Emo
back to the
Jingshan's
ward
stay in the
first.
hospital,
You're still.
Jin Wan
With
didn't
that,
sleep in his
she
ward
hurriedly
under the
reached out
doctor's doctor's
to help
advice.
him.
But
Mrs.
obediently
Mo.
recuperated
suddenly
in her
winked
own
at
ward.
Jinwan.
This time,
Seeing that Emo Jinshin
avoided
could walk
Su
around at
Jilan's
will,
hand,
but she
but
could
Su
only
Jilan
lie in bed
insisted on
and
helping
watch
him.
this man's
Jinwan
ambiguous
pursed her
expression
lips,
when he came
got
to
up,
visit him from
and
time
put
to
her
time.
hand on Emo
It was
Jinshin's
really
arm.
the tables
Emo
had
Jinshin
turned.
leaned toward her.
There were so many
Obviously,
Chinese in
he
Los
couldn't
Angeles
hold on any longer.
that the Spring
How
Festival
many
in
times
China
has the doctor
could
told
be
you
felt
not
in
to
the
get out
major
of bed
shopping
these
malls
days?
and streets here?
Did you pull out the
On
needle
the day
yourself?
before New Year's
Don't
Eve,
you feel any pain
Emo
at all?
Jinshin could finally
Jinwan
be
was
discharged
standing
from the
closest to
hospital.
Emo Jinshin
When
now.
he walked out of the
When
hospital,
most of the man's
Shine
body
Group's
almost
car was
leaned
already
toward her.
waiting outside.
She couldn't help
In other
muttering
words,
beside him.
Emo Shaozi
What if the
didn't
wound
intend
has a
to give
problem
them
again?
any room to choose.
Aren't you afraid that
Since
the
they
wound
had
will be
returned to
inflamed
Los
repeatedly?
Angeles,
leading to
naturally had
infection
to
and
listen
fever,
to his arrangements.
and finally burn into
A
a
middle-aged
driver came out of the car
who was standing behind
and nodded respectfully
She was
to
really
Emo
CEO
Jingshin.
Mo's wife.
CEO Emo, long time no see.
Why didn't she
Are
learn
you
to
feeling
be better?
gentler than Miss Sue
Chairman
at a time
Emo
like
asked
this?
us to pick you up.
How could she insult
The driver
Mr.
was
Emo?
a Chinese man in his
Sujilon
40s
watched Emo
named George.
Jingshin leaning against
He had been a
Jinwon
butler and driver
defensively,
for the Emo
and suddenly
family in
looked
Los
at Jinwon's
Angeles for many
face.
years.
For a moment,
And was very familiar with
Jinwon
Emo
seemed to see
Jingshin.
some kind of
Emo
determination
Jingshin glanced
and
at him
coldness in her
indifferently.
eyes.
Did I
Although
say
it
I would go
flashed
back
away.
today?
Obviously,
George
she was
paused
not
and
the only
explained.
one who saw it.
But tomorrow is the Spring Festival in China.
Chairman
Chapter
Emo learned that you were
333.
discharged today.
Jinwon raised her
So he
hand
specially
and
sent
held
us
Emo
to pick you
Jingshin's
up
arm.
and
Noticing
Nan Hung
that
was
at that
not here
moment,
today.
he seemed
Feng
to have
Ling,
intentionally
K,
moved in front
and
of
the
her.
others were going to
She
send them
remembered
to
that
Feng
Feng Ling
Ling's
had said that
residence
Miss
in Los
Sue had
Angeles.
intermittent mania.
But now the Emo
But
family
Sujilon
came to
couldn't
pick
be
them
so
up.
irrational.
They didn't
as
say
to do
anything
out of
and were
line
about
in
to
such a
move
place.
Jinwon. At the
And
same
Emo
time,
Jingshin's things to
Emo
the car.
Jingshin took
Emo
Jinwon's
Jingshin
hand
said,
and held it,
"Put them down,"
silently giving her a
Feng
sense
Ling
of
and
steadiness
K
and
paused,
peace.
took down the
Not letting
luggage
her
that
be
was about
affected
to
by
be put
these
in the
things.
car.
Their
And turned to
movements
look at
didn't
Emo
escape
Jingshin,
Sujilon's eyes.
waiting for his instructions.
Sujilon looked at their
Put
interlocked
them in our
hands
car.
and said bitterly,
Emo Jingshin was
Jingshin,
expressionless.
we've been
and
together
took a
for
look at
2
George.
years.
I've
If
worked
there's
overtime with
I'll
you,
go back tomorrow.
and I've gone on business
You can
trips
go.
with you.
George had
You
been
and
in
I
the
have
Emo family
experienced
for
as
many
much as
years,
Jinwon,
and certainly
I've been
knew the
honest with
relationship
you.
between
I
Emo
didn't mean to
Jingshin
lie to you
and the Emo family.
But it's unfair for
He
you
didn't
to
say
deny
anything,
my feelings
nodded,
for you,
and returned
I've been
to the
waiting
car.
for you for so
After
many
waiting
years.
for a moment,
Seeing
enough.
that Emo Jingshin
Emo
really
Jingshin's
didn't want to
pale
get in the
face
car,
added more
he
indifference
had
to
to
his
drive
clear
back
and
to
cold
Shine
look.
Group. Starting with a lie is doomed to have no ending. There were 2
Miss
cars
Sue's
parked in
feelings are
front
just
of the
your
hospital.
obsession.
The
I
black
don't owe you
Bentley
anything,
appeared on the busy
and I
street
don't
of
need
Los
to be
Angeles
responsible
at
for
about
you.
4 o'clock
Go.
in the afternoon.
Don't embarrass yourself
followed
too
by
much.
a car belonging to
Miss
Feng
Sue,
Ling and the
Kay
others.
consciously took
It
it as
wasn't
Mr.
until
Mo's
6
order,
o'clock that
so
they
he
arrived at
immediately
11
approached
base.
Sujilon
The
and
winter
said
day was
politely,
too short.
Mr.
and the
Mrs.
sky
Emo
was
are
already
not in
dark.
good health now.
Jinwon
Please
didn't
leave.
expect that she could
Sujilon
visit the
nodded
base
and said,
as soon as she was
Mr. and
discharged
Mrs.
from
Emo,
the
please
hospital.
leave.
When Emo Jingshin
Sujilon
arrived,
still wanted to
Nan
speak,
Hung was
but
talking
Kay
with
stood
someone
in front of
inside.
her.
When he came out,
Sujilon's hands
he
kept
didn't look
shaking.
as casual as
She
usual.
tried to control her
He took
emotions,
a solemn look at
but the
Jinwon
sadness
and
in
Feng
her
Ling,
eyes was very
and then
obvious.
went in with Emo Jingshin
The
to have
atmosphere
a
here was
private
really
chat.
not good for her.
This was a very
She took
private
a deep
place
breath
in
and
11
said,
base.
Okay, I'll
Jinwon
go back.
didn't go in.
Jingshin, take
but
care
let
of
Feng
yourself.
Ling and Kay take
When
her
you're
to other
discharged
places.
from the hospital aisle,
After visiting the
Miss
shooting
Sue,
range
please.
and some close
Before
combat
she
training
finished
areas,
speaking,
Kay,
Jinwon
who had
looked
been
at the
standing
few
in
young
front
men
of her, who were
reached
still
out to the
training in
door.
such cold weather,
Sujilon
and
clenched her
turned to look at
fingers,
Feng Ling,
managed to
who was
maintain
always
the last
dressed in
trace
black.
of demeanor,
Did you
and
used
walked
to be
out.
like this every
Kay
day?
decisively blocked her view, all the way to prevent her from looking into the ward. When the 2 of them walked away,
Chapter
Nan Hung,
339,
who had been leaning
Mrs.
against the
Emo,
door of the
don't
ward,
be fooled by Feng
glanced
Ling's
at
thin
Emo
body.
Jingshin. Every
Whose
time
face
we
was
train,
frighteningly
she is
pale.
better than us.
Are you sure you
And
can
when
hold
we
on?
fight, she is
As
always
soon as
the
he
first
finished
one.
speaking,
In terms
Emo
of close
Jingshin
combat,
couldn't answer him at all.
80% of the
With
people in our
Jinwon's
base
cry of
can't beat her.
surprise, the
And
man
the
in front
remaining
of her leaned
20%
toward her.
can only beat
She
her
rushed
if
to
they have
hold
a
him.
chance.
Jinwon
She
was
is very
startled.
fierce.
She immediately
Kay said
tightened
as he
her grip
put his
on
hand
him,
on Feng
afraid
Ling
that
he
he
would
would
fall.
boldly. Nan Hung
As if he were
frowned
getting along
and turned
with
to
a
call
brother.
the nurse.
Feng Ling
When the
didn't
doctor
avoid
and
him but
nurse
said
came
coldly,
over and hurriedly
refused
helped
to be
Emo
flattered.
Jingshin up,
Kay
Jinwon
smiled.
looked at the blood
What's
on her
wrong?
hand.
Are you
And then
afraid
at
that
the blood
Mrs.
oozing
Emo
from
will
the
raise
back
your
of Emo
salary when
Jingshin's
she
light
finds out
blue
your
hospital
status in our
gown?
base?
Her heart skipped a
Alas,
beat.
it's not
His
that
ward
Mrs.
was
Emo
4
can't
floors
afford
away
it.
from hers.
Get lost.
Sujilon
Feng
hadn't
Ling
been here
raised
for
her
long,
hand and slapped
and he
him
had
away.
suddenly come.
I'll walk
How
here
on
with her
earth did
for
you
a
get
while.
the news? Pull
Why
out
are
the
you
needles
always
and
following
come
her?
here. I don't think you can have a private conversation
His
with
injury
Mrs.
wasn't
Emo.
just a simple
Last
flesh
time,
wound.
you
He
had
had so
heard from the
embarrassed
doctor
that you almost
the sharp
smashed
part
my
of the
cell
gun,
phone,
but didn't hurt
before
his
Kay
bones.
finished speaking.
But the wound
Before
was
Feng
so
Ling
deep
raised
that
her
the
foot
bone
to
could
kick
be
him.
seen. He
It
nimbly
wasn't easy
dodged
for
and
him
ran
to
away.
recuperate for 2 or 3 days.
stood on the side of the
when it was
training
almost
ground with a
healed,
smile.
he got out of bed
Glanced
again.
at Kay's back
It was
as
getting
he ran
dark.
away.
Jean
And then
Wan
turned to
look
look
at
at
the
the people
people
who were training
outside
inside.
the ward.
She touched
Nan
the metal
Hung looked
railing
at the
next to
woman
her with
standing
both
in front
hands,
of the door with
and
a
the
sigh.
cold touch made
Jean
her
Wan,
feel that everything was
after
real.
Mo Jingshan was
Just
brought
like in
back to the
Cambodia,
ward by the medical
in such a
staff,
heavy training
the
base,
wound was retreated.
it seemed that
The
everyone
bleeding
had a
was
gun on their
stopped,
waist,
and the medicine
and from
was
time
applied.
to time,
As she
she
said,
could hear the
Mo
rhythmic sound
Jingshan's
of
wound was
gunfire
sore
coming
and
from
the
the shooting
inflammation
range.
had not
You
subsided.
can't enter this
A
kind
few
of
hours
place
later,
easily, can you?
Mo
Jean
Jingshan
Wan
began
asked.
to have a high fever.
Feng Ling stood
and
next
his
to her,
temperature soared
looking
to 40
in the same
degrees.
direction as her.
If he hadn't
and
been in the
answered
hospital,
lightly,
and
he might really have
Jean
been
Wan
burnt
turned
out
to
if
look
the
at her.
fever had been
Then
delayed
how did you
any
get in?
longer.
The
The
medical
medical
staff
staff
was
was
still in
from
their
their
base,
so
and was
Jean Wan
introduced
couldn't
by
go in
him.
now.
But I
She
was
could
too
only
small
stand
when I was a
outside
teenager
and accept the
I was a
baptism
woman,
of Nan Heng's
but I
eyes.
had to pretend to be a
I've
man.
been watching him
So I
every
looked
moment
even
of the
thinner
day
and smaller
told
in
him
a
not
group
to
of
move.
newcomers.
But when I
At
went
that
back to the
time,
ward to take
Nan
a
Hung
shower,
was very averse
you
to
all
me
forgot
and didn't
to keep
think
an eye
highly
on
of
him.
me. He tried many ways to force me to leave, and the others didn't know
forcing
to
me
stop
to
him
undergo
either.
the most
Didn't
intense
they know that the
training and
wound on his
tests?
back would have
It
a
almost
problem
cost me half
if he
my
came out
life,
like this?
but I still refused
So what if I
to
stopped
leave.
him?
It's
Maybe
your
I
own
do
man
have
who was
talent
scared
and
today.
explosive power
How
in this
can you
aspect.
blame it on me?
I'm small,
Jin-Won glared
but
at
I'm
him.
strong.
I've just
and
been
I can bear
bombarded by my
hardships.
ex-girlfriend
Later,
and stimulated
I changed from
physically
the
and
little
mentally,
thing he didn't think
and
highly
faced with
of
my
to the
husband's
person
high fever
he
and coma.
occasionally had to
Can't
get
you
up
take
in the
my
middle
mood
of the
into
night to train
consideration?
with me and comfort me a little.
Jin-Won leaned against the
Nan-Hung
metal
rolled his
railing
eyes at
and
her.
looked at her.
I don't see how you've
Nan-Hung's
been
nature should be
stimulated by
very
your
cold and
ex-girlfriend.
difficult to get
Jin-Won
along with.
also glared at him.
It's hard for him
I
to
haven't had
change his
time to be
opinion of someone
stimulated,
he doesn't think
but the
highly
person
of.
you failed to
Just
stop
like
has
before,
rushed into the
I
ward.
felt that he didn't
You
like
want
me.
to be stimulated,
If it weren't
don't
for
you?
Emo Jinction,
Nan-Hung raised his
he might
cold
not even have
eyebrows.
bothered to say a
If
few
you're willing
words
to
me.
listen,
It's
I
really
don't mind
not
telling
easy
you
for
how
you to
Emo
change his
Jinction
opinion of
and
such a
Sujilon
stubborn
together.
man.
No matter
He's
how
that kind of
sincere and
person.
how insincere they were. Miss Sue is right.
He's ruthless.
They've been
But you
together
have
for
to
2
be more
years,
ruthless than him.
and it's not impossible
Ling
for them
raised
to
her
forget
chin
each other,
and pointed to
it's not
several
impossible
people who
for
were
them
training
to fall in
close
love with
combat.
each other over time.
When I was 17,
I don't want to listen.
my body was basically
Jin-Won looked
developed.
resolute.
At that
Didn't
time,
you just say you
the
want to be
clothes I wore
stimulated?
were especially loose.
I find that since
when I
Emo
was
Jinction
training
and
with
I got
them,
together,
I was afraid
you've
that
been
they would find out
particularly
my true
against us.
gender.
I'm
So
not
there was a
interested
period
in
of time
Sujilon's
when I
past,
didn't dare to move.
but I'm very interested
Nan-Hung
in you
fought
now.
with me several times.
Why are
and
you
found
interested
that I had
in me?
strangely become
You
timid.
act as if you'll
So
die
he
if you don't
directly
say
beat me
something
to
to
the
me
ground.
every day.
At that time,
I always feel
the
as
weather
if
was
I've robbed your
especially
man.
cold.
Nan
He told
Hung,
me to lie
do you
here
have
for an
feelings
hour
Emo
and
Jinction?
not to get up.
Jin-Won
If I
looked
dared
at
to
him
get up,
meaningfully.
he would kick me
and
once.
when Nan-Hung choked
so
on the
ruthless.
cigarette and coughed
I didn't
several
get up
times.
at that time.
She
I
glanced
lay
at
there for the
Feng
whole
Ling, who had
night,
just come out of
thinking
the
of all
elevator.
kinds of ways
Nan-Hung
to hide
was
my
coughing
chest and
hard.
figure.
And in
Feng
the
Ling
end, I
came
fainted
over,
from the cold.
took a strange look
and
at
then,
him.
There was
then
no
looked
then.
at Jin-Won
When I
flatly.
woke up,
Kay
Mrs.
and the
Mo,
others sent me to
I've
the
arranged for
infirmary.
other people to
I
guard
woke
your
up
ward.
quickly and opened
No
my
one will
eyes
disturb
as soon
you in
as
the
I reached
future.
the infirmary.
Jin-Won nodded.
Afraid that they would
In
find
fact,
out that my
if
body
it had
was
been
different,
anyone else,
I
they
pushed
wouldn't
them
have
away
been able to
and
get
ran
in.
back to my room
After
alone.
all,
I took a
Sujilon
hot
had
shower,
been friends with
but
them
I still
before.
caught a cold,
So it was
I had a high
understandable
fever
that
for
they
2
didn't
days
dare to
and
block
slept
her
alone for
blatantly.
2 days. Then I recovered. Maybe it's because I'm young that I
Chapter
don't care how my
334.
body is tortured.
Understanding the
From
meaning
her
behind
words,
Jin-Won's
it was
words,
clear that she
Feng
meant
Ling
that
said,
Nan-Hung did
"We'll
not come to
investigate
visit
those
her at
people."
all. Right
She
now,
said it
they've
so
already been
lightly.
replaced.
But a young
Don't
girl in her
worry.
teens already
Not
had
long
such
after,
a strong endurance.
the doctor came out of the
Even
ward.
now,
He
when
said
she
that
mentioned
Emo
these
Jinction
things,
had been
she
given
did
an
not
injection
seem
to
feel
reduce
any
his
pain
fever,
or grievance.
but his fever
Hearing
was
this,
still obvious.
Jin-Won felt
His
an
body temperature
inexplicable
was
surge
only
of
under
emotion
39
surging
degrees,
in her heart.
and he was still
Feng
running
Ling,
a high
can
fever.
you teach me how to shoot?
In the next few hours,
Why do you
before
suddenly
his
want to
fever
learn how to
completely
shoot?
subsided,
Last time
someone
in
would have to
Cambodia,
stay up
I
all
fired
night
that
to
shot.
take care of him.
If you hadn't
and
come
lower
in
his
time,
body temperature,
I probably would have
they would
shot
also have
myself
to
again.
feed him warm
Who
water
knows what will
frequently.
happen in the future?
With Jin-Won here
Anyway,
naturally,
I can train here now.
No one would snatch
Can you
this
teach
task
me?
from her.
Who said that
In the
only
dead of the
men had a
night,
hero complex?
Nan-Hung returned to
Women
the base.
also had it.
Feng Ling
No one
rested
wanted
on the
to be
long
the one
bench
who held
outside
others
the ward.
back when they were
The
in
room
danger.
was quiet. It was
Emo
always good to
Jinction
have
was
a
still
skill.
sleeping.
Feng
His
Ling wanted to
complexion
say
was
that it was
different
better
from
to
when he
teach
was
her
running
some
a high
simple
fever.
self-defense skills
Right now,
than to
his
shoot.
body temperature had
But when
dropped
she was
slightly.
about to speak, the man's usually
remembered
handsome
that
face was
Jin-Won
pale.
was pregnant.
He was sleeping
and
too
couldn't learn
quietly.
these things that
Jin-Won
required
felt
extreme
even more
movements for
anxious
the
in her
time
heart.
being.
She
Then
did not
teach
know
me,
when his injuries
but I
would
feel that
completely
even if you
recover.
learn it,
She
you
won't
won't
be
be
able
able
to
to
touch
use
his
it in the
forehead.
future.
It was
Let's
indeed
talk
still
about
very
whether
hot.
I can use it or
Jin-Won
not.
stood up to
The
bring
main
in the
thing
news
is
that you are
pack
too
that the
handsome.
nurse had just
I want
brought
to be
in.
as handsome as
After
you.
holding it in her
In the
hand for a
evening,
while,
the training
she
time
carefully
on the
placed
shooting
it on
range
his
had
head.
just ended.
Although Emo
And then
Jinction
there
was
was a gunshot.
unconscious,
He did
when an
not
important
seem to be
guest in the
sleeping
base's
well.
conference
Due to the
room heard
coldness on his
gunshot.
head,
He
he
calmly
unconsciously
commented,
furrowed his
"This
brows.
sounds like a newcomer."
Jin-Won gently placed her
Nan-Hung
hand on
glanced
his
at the
shoulder,
time,
patting
and then
him
exchanged
gently
a
as
look
she
with
said,
Emo Jinction,
"You're
who was
running a
sitting on the
fever.
other side.
Sleep well."
Right now, you don't have to worry about anything.
He then stood up
to sleep
and
well
looked at the
and
situation
bring
on
your
the
fever
shooting
down
range
as soon as possible
through the base's surveillance
She was
cameras.
not sure if her words
he saw
were
that
effective
Feng Ling and Jin
or if
Wan were
Emo
each
Jinxin
holding a
was
gun.
not too awake.
Feng Ling taught
But not
Jin
long
Wan how
after
to hold
she
a gun.
spoke, and
The
Jin
man's
Wan
breathing
imitated
returned
her.
to normal.
Feng Ling
He had
fired a
already
shot
fallen
and
into
hit
a
the
deep
bullseye.
sleep.
Jin
Such
Wan
an
also
obedient
fired a shot.
Jinxin.
Fortunately,
If not for his
the
worrying
bullet
pale
didn't fly out,
complexion,
but it
Jin
only
Wan
hit
would
the
have
third
found him
ring.
slightly
Seeing
adorable.
the accuracy
His
of this
appearance
woman's
when he was
shooting,
asleep was
Nan
completely
Hung recalled
different
the shot
from when
that
he was
Jin Wan
awake.
had fired in
In
the
this
nick of
world,
time in Cambodia.
it was likely that
He
not
narrowed
many
his
people
eyes
would have the
and sneered,
opportunity
turning
to
to
see
say,
such a fragile,
"Your woman is
quiet,
learning how
and
to shoot from
defenseless Emo
Feng Ling."
Jinxin.
It seems
Jin
that
Wan
the
pulled a
promise you
chair
made
over
to Elder
and
Emo
sat
by
to
the
not
bed.
stain your hands
From
with
time
blood
to time,
will be
she
taken
touched
over
his
by
head
your
and
wife.
hands.
Is it
And
because she was
occasionally used the
stimulated last
electronic
time
thermometer
and
to
wants
measure
to
his
learn some
temperature?
skills
For two
so that she can
consecutive
fight
hours,
with us in the future?
she tried to find a way to feed him warm water. and wipe his palms and neck with a towel dipped in warm
Chapter
water.
340.
2 hours later,
Man Hung raised his brows.
Jingxin's body
Not
temperature
necessarily.
finally dropped to
A
around
person's
37
potential
degrees.
is limitless.
After confirming
Previously
that
in
his
Cambodia,
fever was gone,
it was enough
Jin
to
Wan
prove
carefully
that
removed
sometimes
the ice pack
the
from
most
his head
unexpected
and gently
people
wiped
can
his
become the
face.
key to victory.
She then sat by the
Furthermore,
bed and watched him
no
sleep
matter how
under
good
the
the
faint
light
light
of
of
the
marksmanship was.
the man's
She
face was
clearly
still
wanted
pale.
to protect her
He just
man's
lay
heart.
quietly on the
Emo
bed.
Jingxin, who had mostly
The bruise on his
recovered,
brow bone a few
revealed a
days
hint
ago
of
had
a smile on his
disappeared.
lips.
His clean
Between the
appearance
two of
had
them,
an inexplicable
one was
kind
here,
of sickly beauty,
and the other was
she
slowly
recalled how
learning
this
to
man
shoot
had
at the
stood in
shooting
her
range.
hospital room.
Even
During
from
the
such
day,
a distance,
and treated
she could
Su
still
Jilan
forcefully
with no
feed him a
emotion.
mouthful
He
of
was
dog
so
food.
cold that he seemed to be able
lips
to isolate
twitched.
himself
He
from
moved
all
away
other
from the
women
monitor
except
screen
for her, to allow
Jin
Emo
Wan
Jingxin
supported her chin
to
with one
continue
hand
admiring his
and
wife's
leaned
back
against
view.
the edge of the
The
bed.
sky gradually
She watched the
darkened.
man's sleeping
The base
face
was
and
surrounded
gently
by
held
bright
his
lights.
hand.
Especially
She slowly
the shooting
and gently
range.
intertwined her
The
fingers
lights here
with his
seemed to be
palm
brighter than
against
the other
palm.
training grounds.
Jin Wan did not know
Even
how
though the
she
wind
had
was
fallen
bone
asleep.
chilling.
When
Jin
she
Wan
suddenly
was still
woke
in the
up,
mood to play.
she felt that her
She
head
fired
was
at a
slightly
target
heavy.
50 meters
She abruptly
away.
raised her
Reality
eyes and met the
proved
man
that
she
she
really
black
could not
eyes.
hit a target
When did
more
you
than
wake
100
up?
meters away.
Feeling that his hand
However,
had
within
unknowingly
50
touched her
meters,
head,
she could
Jin Wan
basically
rushed
hit a
to sit up
five-ring
straight
target
and
raised her
initially,
hand to gently
Feng
pull
Ling
it
stood
down.
by her side
She
to
felt
teach
the
her all the
temperature of his
movements.
hand
Now,
and confirmed
it was
that
Jin
his
Wan
fever
who
was
stood
no
by her
longer
side to
rising.
train her aim.
Only then did she
Feng Ling
relax.
would occasionally speak
I actually
up to
fell
guide
asleep.
her on which
Wait a
positions
moment.
were not standard.
I'll go call the doctor.
Just like that.
There's
She
no
trained
need
for
to
more
call
than
the
half an
doctor.
hour.
Your
In
fever
the
has
cold
already
wind,
subsided.
Jin Wan was
What's
covered
the point
in
of
sweat.
calling them?
She moved
Emo
to the side
Jingxin
over
held her
10
hand
steps,
and did not let her
planning
go.
to challenge the
You had a
target
high
100
fever last
meters
night
away again,
and only went
Pung,
down after
it
midnight.
tilted again.
Let the
Jin
doctor
Wan
come and
pursed her
check.
lips.
It's
As
just
she
an
loaded
infection,
the gun,
she said.
I'll just take a
Feng
few
Ling,
more days of
your
anti-inflammatory
marksmanship is so good.
medicine and
How
injections.
many years did you practice?
There's no need to make
Do you
such
need
a
to
big
practice
fuss
for this
The
100
man's
meters
voice
for
was
a
lower
long
than
time?
a few days ago.
I feel like
but
the
each
wind
word was
speed
clear.
will also affect
You
the
took
direction
care
of
of me
the
for
shot.
an entire night.
No one behind
Have
her
you forgotten
answered
that
her.
you're pregnant?
Jin Wan raised
There are
the gun
senior nurses
and
in the
continued
hospital,
to aim at the
but
target
if they're
100
here,
meters away.
it won't be convenient
planning
for
to
me
shoot
to come
again.
in to see you.
All of a sudden,
Besides, your
she
fever
felt a
was too
warmth on the
serious
back
last
of her
night.
hand.
If
Just
I'm
as
not
she was
here,
about to
I
shoot,
won't be
she
able to
paused.
sleep.
Without
I might
turning
as well
back,
stay here to
she
watch
knew it
over
was
you.
Emo Jingxin.
Jin Wan
The man
smiled
clean
and
and
habitually
refreshing
touched
scent
his
surrounded
forehead.
her.
Then
He
I'll
didn't
call
say
Feng
anything
Ling
and
buy
only
some
stood
food.
behind her,
Feeling his
holding
body
her
temperature
waist
and straightening
Jin
her
Wan
posture.
sat by the bed
He
with
held
a sigh
her
of
fingers
relief
with his other
and
hand
rubbed her
and
face
said in a
against
low
his
and
palm.
hoarse voice by
She
her
said
ear,
with dim eyes,
"Try it now.
Don't do this again
Jin
in the
Wan
future.
felt that her hand
I'm
did
afraid
not
that the
seem to be
wound will
much
become
different from
infected.
before.
And you pulled
However,
out the
it seemed
anti-inflammatory
like a certain
needle.
angle.
In
that
fact,
she had
whether
not
it's
been
Miss
able to
Sue or
control
anyone
had
else,
been corrected.
it doesn't matter.
She calmly aimed
Even
at
if
the
you want to
target
protect
100
me,
meters away.
you have to see if your
and
body can
forcefully
take
hooked
it.
her fingers.
I'm not a little
Bang.
white flower that
Bullseye.
can be easily
Looking
bullied.
at the bullseye
As
that
long
was
as
shot
I'm firm
through,
enough,
Jin Wan,
no one can do anything
back then
to me.
in Cambodia,
But you are.
she had repeatedly
Now that you're
feared
injured
that
like
something
this,
would happen
if
to
we
Emo
stand
Jingxin.
outside and are
In
blown
the
by the
end,
wind,
it turned out
the
that
first
he had
one
never
to fall will
intended to
definitely
shoot.
be you.
No matter how powerful you are,
You
Jin
have
Wan
to know
turned
your
back
limits
to
now,
look at the
okay?
man behind her.
You speak as
The
if I'm
cold wind
already
blew
so
past.
old that I can't
Emo
get out of
Jingxin
bed with a
opened the
little
black
injury.
cashmere coat she
I'm
had
not that
bought,
fragile.
held her in his
The
arms
man
and
chuckled
wrapped
lightly.
her in the coat.
TSK.
At the same time,
Then get out of
he
bed
took
if
the
you
gun
have
from
the
her
ability.
hand, and
If
threw
you
it
have
to
the
Feng Ling.
ability,
Feng Ling
don't
raised
let the
her hand
wound
to
get
catch the
infected.
gun, looked at Jin Wan with a smile,
An inflamed
and
high
walked
fever
away.
is more serious
You've been
than a
standing
normal
here
cold.
practicing for
It's
so
really
long.
scary to
Aren't
have
you
a fever
cold?
of 40
The
degrees
man's
Celsius
low voice was
and
close
be
to her
unconscious.
ear.
It's
Jin
not
Wan
cold.
picked up a
It's
hospital
quite
note by the
exciting.
side.
Jin
On
Wan
it was
smiled
written the
honestly.
temperature she had
Because of her
recorded
poor
when
marksmanship,
she helped him take
her
his
smile was a
temperature
little
several
shy,
times last
and
night.
a dimple appeared on
Look
her
at it
lips.
yourself.
She didn't
If I
feel
had a fever
cold,
like this,
but now that she
wouldn't
was
you be
wrapped in the
angry at
man's
me
clothes,
for not taking care
she
of my
turned
body?
around in his arms arms and put
Jingxin
her arms
glanced at
around
it
his back.
and did not argue
Aren't
with
you
her.
talking to Nan
He
Hung
gently
inside?
patted her hand,
Are you
asking
done?
mildly,
It's nothing
"Where's Nan
important.
Hung?"
I'm meeting
He
an
returned
old
to the
friend.
base last night.
Jingxin
I don't
kissed
know
her
if he
forehead.
has come to the
You
hospital
can just
yet.
play around with
Are you
shooting
looking for
here.
him?
There's
Jin
no
Wan
need to
placed the
specially
note
learn.
back
And
in
turn
the
to pour
future,
him a cup of
there
warm
won't
water.
be any opportunities
And
for you to
you
shoot.
took care of me here
I just
for an
suddenly
entire
feel
night
that Feng
last
Ling
night.
is especially
Rest
handsome.
well today. I
Call
feel that
Nan
a
Hung for
woman's
me.
handsome side
All
is
right, I'll call
especially
him in a
charming.
bit.
So
Lie
I wanted
down
to
and
learn
don't
from
move.
her.
The
Jin
man
Wan
brought
brought
the
the
cup
cup with his
over
dark
and
fed
fed
him
him
a
a
few
few
mouthfuls
mouthfuls
of
of
water
water
with a
with a
spoon.
You're
already
already
very
very
charming
charming
right
somewhat
now.
helpless
Do you
because
want to
of
be
her
more
careful
charming?
feeding him
I'm
water.
already restraining
Right now,
myself.
Jin Wan was
Are you
quite
planning
obsessed
to
with
make me
feeding him.
accompany you in bed every night until the day we die? Jin Wan.
Chapter
The next day at
335.
noon, after
Mo
calling Nan
Jingxin
Hung,
drove the black
Jin
Bentley
Wan turned
directly
to
to
see
the
that
Mo
Feng Ling
family's
had
manor
gotten
in
up
Los
from the lounge
Angeles.
chair in the corridor.
Although this place
was
didn't
walking
occupy
over.
as much
You
land
didn't
as
sleep
the
all
Mo
night?
family's old
Jin
mansion
Wan
in High
asked.
City,
Feng
It was
Ling
still
didn't
more
answer,
than 1,000
but
meters
glanced
long.
into the ward.
Moreover,
how is it
in Los Angeles?
Is Mr. Mo awake?
Where every inch of land was
awake.
worth its weight
He
in
must
gold.
have something to talk
And it was
to
in a
Nan Hung
prosperous,
alone.
wealthy area.
I just called Nan
It could be
Hung.
seen that
He'll be
Shine
here
Group
soon.
had indeed stood
Jin
tall
Wang
in
glanced
the
at
American
Feng Ling.
Chinese community
You weren't
for
in the
many
hospital
years.
yesterday
After
afternoon.
all,
Where
it
did
was
you
said
go?
that this manor in the
Feng
wealthy
Ling
area
paused
had
and
been
said
built for
lightly,
many years.
I dealt with some
Those who
personal
could
matters.
live here were not
Jin
ordinary
Wang
people.
glanced at her again.
As soon as she got
Even
out
though
of the
she
car,
could see that
Jin
Feng Ling
Wang
had
found
something
that there
on
were
her
two
mind.
luxury cars
She didn't
parked
ask
in the
more,
parking lot
and just asked her
she
to
asked
help
in
buy some
confusion.
food.
Does
Jin
the
Wang
Mo
took care of
family have
Mo
many
Jingshan
relatives
all
in
night
Los
and didn't
Angeles?
sleep well.
Is there
Her
a
face was
relative
haggard
today?
that she didn't notice.
Mo Jingshan
Feng
glanced
Ling
at
was
it.
now in charge
No.
of Jin Wan's
Then
daily
why are there
needs
so many cars?
and knew some of her
Someone
habits
must
like
have
the
driven
back
it
of her
here.
hand.
If it's
Seeing
only
that
the
Jin
Mo
Wan
family's
didn't
cars,
intend to sleep
shouldn't they
after
be
returning
parked in
to
the
the
garage?
garage?
And didn't
Jin
look
Wan
very
glanced
good.
inside again.
She went out to
At
buy
this
some
time,
food.
the
and
housekeeper
came back
George,
with other
who
things
used
on
to
her way
work
back.
as a driver,
Came
Mrs.
out to
Mo,
welcome
do you
them.
want a mask?
CEO
When
Mo,
Feng Ling
Mrs.
pushed
Mo
the door
welcome
open,
back.
Jin
It's
Wan
just
was
the right
lying on the
time.
bed with her
Dinner
eyes
is about
closed,
to start.
trying to sleep.
Mo Jingshan
But she
nodded
really
lightly
couldn't sleep
and did not
as
say
soon
much.
as she closed her
Jin
eyes.
Wan called him Uncle
She saw the way
George.
Su
As
Jilan
she was
looked
about
at
to
Mo
walk
Jingshan
in,
yesterday.
Jin Wan was
How much
suddenly
did she
held by
love
the
him
man's hand
that she would throw
She
away
was
all
forced
her
to stop
self-esteem
and turn to look
and
at Mo
pride to try to
Jingshan
hold on to even the slightest bit of affection
She was about
for
to
him.
ask him what
To
he
be
was
honest,
doing.
Jin
But
Wan
because
didn't
of his
like that
gaze,
particularly
she
persistent look
subconsciously
in her
turned
eyes.
her head to look
In the
inside.
end,
Mo
Feng Ling's
Jingshan
words
looked
successfully
ahead,
caused Jin
coldly
Wan to
watching
open her
Su Jilan,
eyes.
who had just
She
walked
sat
out
up on
of the
the
door
bed,
of the villa,
only to
and
see
the
Feng
man's
Ling
aura
holding a
instantly
bag in
reached
her
a new
hand
height.
and
A few
placing
days
several
ago,
different brands
Mo
of facial
Jingshan was
masks on
sickly
her
pale
bed.
and weak.
Why
But
did you
now
buy
he was
these
as
things?
cold and grim.
Jin Wan was
exuding a
surprised.
silent and
She
chilling
couldn't
aura
imagine
of
Feng
alienation.
Ling
Standing
Jin
in
Wan
front
had thought
of
of
the skincare
countless
counter.
possibilities.
I saw that
She
you
had
don't
thought
look
that
well.
the person she
I
would
heard
meet
that
here
women
was in
often have
Shenyang.
to use masks
After all,
when their skin
Mo
is not
Shaza
in good
intended
condition.
to play matchmaker
I haven't
with his
used
most
this kind of
capable
thing
secretary,
before,
and didn't
but
know
she
which
never
brand was
expected
better.
that it would be Su
Just now,
Jilan.
I passed by
Since
the mall
Su
and
Jilan
bought a
was
few.
here, Jin Wan
Hearing her
glanced at the
words,
villa.
Jin
Then
Wan
the Su
picked up two
family
of the
should be
masks
here
and
too.
looked at them.
No wonder there
The
were
corner
so
of
many
her mouth
cars in the
twitched.
parking lot.
It was obvious
She
that
turned to
Feng
see a
Ling
gray-haired
had never
old
used
man
any
through the
skincare
window of the
products
villa.
before.
In the
She
Mo
had
family,
never used any facial
except for
masks
grandfather
either.
Mo.
In addition
There was
to
no
whitening
other
and
old man of this
moisturizing
age.
products, so she
There were
guessed that
even
this should be
products
the
to
legendary
tighten and
elder
remove
Su.
wrinkles.
Did he hear
The
that
two
they
of them
would
were
come
only
back
in
for
their
the
early
reunion
20s,
dinner after
and
failing
their
to enter
faces
the
were full of
hospital to see
collagen.
Mo Jingshan?
They were very young,
So he came to
so
the
how could
Mo
they use
family
these
to wait.
things? Jin Wan's
You haven't
good mood
used it
suddenly
before?
exploded. Jin Wan suddenly smiled and looked up at her. Feng Ling met her bright eyes and
Chapter
instantly
341.
understood what she meant.
Mo Jingshan's
She took a
expression
step
was
back
cold and
said,
handsome.
Mrs.
He
Mo,
held Jin
these
Wan's
are all
hand
for you,
and turned to leave.
but I don't need that much.
Not intending to stay a moment longer.
Jin Wan had just been
picked
pulled
up
a few
two
of the
steps when
simplest
Mo
moisturizing
Shao's cold
masks
voice
and
rang.
waved to her.
You just came
Come
back
here.
and you're leaving?
Don't hide so far
Mo
away.
Shaoza didn't
Anyway,
expect that Mo
Man Hung
Jingshan
is
would
now
pull
in
Jin
Mo
Wan
Jingshan's
away
ward,
without any
and the
reaction.
two of us can't go
Jin
in.
Wan paused
Instead
because
of
of Mo
waiting
Shao's
here,
voice.
We might as well
After
do
all,
the masks
as a
together.
daughter-in-law,
You've bought them
it was
anyway.
not good for her to
Jin
be too
Wan
arrogant.
didn't usually use
Mo
these things,
Jingshan didn't let
but she
go
knew
of her
better
hand.
than Feng Ling.
He brought
Seeing
her to
Feng
his
Ling's
side,
determined
put
expression.
his palm on her back.
She narrowed her
and
eyes
forcibly
and
let
smiled.
her out of the
You
Mo
really don't
family's
want to
simple
try them?
black European
You've been in the
door.
base for so many
He said
years.
calmly and coldly,
Although your skin is
ignore
good,
them.
it's still
Let's
a little
go.
rough.
With
Since
that,
you've
he
bought
strode
so
out
many
with Jin
masks,
Wan.
why
At
don't
this
you try
time,
them with me?
Elder Su heard
I'd
the
better
noise
forget
and
it.
had already come
I
out.
don't know how to use
He
these
looked at the
things,
door.
and
Why
although
do
he
I
was
need
old,
such good skin?
his eyes were bright
Feng
and
Ling
full of
continued
spirit.
to take a step
The reason
back.
she came here
Jin Wan
today was
raised her
indeed
eyebrows.
because of Mo Jingshan.
You really don't think of
Before
yourself
coming
as a woman?
here, he
Feng
had
Ling
doubted
hesitated,
whether Mo Jingshan
looked
would
at the
come
things
back.
in Jin Wan's
But
hands,
today was the spring
and asked
festival
after
in
a
China,
long while.
and he was
Do
in
I
Los
really
Angeles.
not look like a woman?
He couldn't just
Jin
pass
Wan
by
rested
his
her
house
chin
3
on one
times
hand
without
and
entering,
sat on the bed.
so he came
She appeared to take a gamble. But Emo Jinxin's attitude said it all, and seemed to be a little self-doubtful. Su Zhilan stood
Your hair
there,
looked good
watching
when it was
the
longer,
two of them who were
but
almost
who knows
far
what
away.
happened to you?
She might have
You
thought
cut
it
it
was
so
not
short.
difficult at first.
I think even Kay's
but
hair
after
is longer
facing the
than yours.
ruthless and
Feng
unconquerable
Ling
Emo
obviously
Jinxin
had
in the
no
hospital,
idea whether the length
and
of
seeing
hair
the
was
two of
good or
them who
not.
didn't even look back.
I'm not used to long
she
hair.
suddenly felt
It's
that
more
everything was
comfortable
too
to have
unreal.
short hair.
Jinwan was
Then when you
wearing a
look in the
white
mirror
cashmere coat,
and see your short
which
hair,
made a couple with
do you
Emo
think you look
Jinxin's
like a
black
woman?
coat.
From
Jinwan
their
raised
backs,
her eyebrows.
the man was tall
I rarely
and straight,
look in the mirror,
and the woman's
in the
slender
end,
figure was
Feng
perfect.
Ling couldn't persuade
Standing
Jinwan,
together,
and was
they were
dragged
indeed
into
a
the
perfect
bathroom by
match.
Jinwan.
Jinwan's
The
long,
two women
curly,
washed their
fluffy
faces
hair
in
fell
front
from
of
her
the
shoulders
mirror,
and scattered
rubbed
on
foam
her
on their
back.
faces.
The ends of
and
her
put the
hair were
masks on their
covered by the
faces.
man's palm.
At first,
when he pressed against
Feng
her
Ling
back.
didn't even know
They
how to
stood
put
so
on the
intimately
masks,
and dazzlingly,
and Jinwan taught
Su
her little
Zhilan
by
hid
little,
the reluctance and depression in
unexpectedly
her
this
eyes.
woman. She looked up and saw that Jin Wan seemed to be thinking about something and hesitated. Finally, but the man firmly pulled her away. 3 masks. Jin Wan successfully got her to stick a complete mask on her face. Are you going to make us feel upset? No one who passed by this festival could imagine what these 2 women now that you're back were doing in the middle of their busy lives. Xiaoza had just knocked on the door when a female voice rang out. Feng Ling had just come out of the bathroom. Where is it? And did he realize that someone was coming in? Hearing so when the door was pushed open from the outside, slowed slightly. Feng Ling's footsteps Jin Wan subconsciously turned her eyes to see a well-maintained, middle-aged woman looking out the door eagerly. He saw the 2 women with masks on their faces of her because there were several holes in the white masks. And the 2 women stared in his direction at the same time with their eyes, took the time to fly all the way back to High City from the United States. But when Feng Ling saw Kay's shocked expression, she immediately took off the mask on her face with a cold face. Jin Wan recognized that this was Mo Jingshan's suddenly mother, raised his mobile phone, and took a photo of them at a glance. Feng Ling paused, and when her eyes met Jin Wan's, taking off the mask, she smiled kindly. Why did you take a photo of Jin Wan? Daughter-in-law, why are you leaving? Damn it, come back. I can see Feng Ling wearing a mask in my life waiting for you. I must show this photo to boss. On the day of their wedding, Ms. Wan saying that Kay forgot the purpose of his visit and called her daughter-in-law several times. Just as Feng Ling was about to grab him, at that time, he opened the door and very resistant as if there was oil on the soles of his feet. Regardless of whether she was being polite or not, delete the photo for me. She turned to the backstage of the bride's makeup shop. Jin Wan was speechless as she felt a pang of guilt in her dash out like the wind. She immediately turned around decisively. Kay was as good as Feng Ling, took Mo Jingshan's arm and she didn't know whether Feng Ling could catch up with him. After returning to the yard of the manor, Kay was tall and had long legs. But Feng Ling ran out with a mask on her face. Came back in a hurry. Was she planning to let the whole hospital see her? Spring festival. He was going to take me to buy gifts with him. We didn't say we were leaving. Mo Jingshan raised his eyebrows and glanced sideways at the little woman, who actually spoke up for him. Hearing this, Wanzhu came out with a smile and took Jin Wan's hand. Oh, your hand is so cold. We're going back to our own home, not to a guest. Why did you buy gifts? Besides, Jingshan, if you want to buy something, go buy yourself. It's so cold. Let Jin Wan go home to warm up. With that, she took Jin Wan inside. The difference in attitude between the mother-in-law and the father-in-law was really too big. Mo Xiaoza still stood in front of the door with a dark expression. When Mo Jingshan saw that Jin Wan had been obediently dragged into the door, he nodded indifferently to Elder Su, who was standing in front of the door. Elder Su smiled lightly. It seems that Jingshan doesn't welcome us. Mo Jingshan's cold and clear eyes swept over Elder Su. He said indifferently, Elder Su, you worry too much. After all, you're a guest. How can I not welcome you? At this time, Su Jilan stared at Mo Jingshan's face and smiled at him. Jingshan, I grew up with my grandfather. There are too few people in the Su family, and this year's New Year is particularly lonely. So I came here to spend the spring festival with Uncle Mo and Auntie Zhu. I didn't expect you would really come back. Mo Jingshan nodded indifferently. Okay, then please have a seat. With that, without saying anything more, he picked up the electronic car key, locked the car on the parking lot, and walked in. At this time, Jin Wan had been pulled into the living room by Mo Jingshan's mother. The decoration style of the Mo family in the United States was different from that of the Mo family in High City. In High City, the decoration style was simple and spacious, with green mountains and clear water suitable for health, while the Mo family's decoration style was quite exquisite. It was obvious that Mo Jingshan's mother was in charge of everything in the family. Mo Xiaoza, a middle-aged man suffering from male chauvinism, might not even touch a vase in the family. I heard that you were all in the hospital a few days ago. Are you all right? Is Jingshan better? Wanzhu asked the servants to bring fruit and tea while looking at Jin Wan with a smile, as if she were looking at her own daughter-in-law. Having been treated coldly by Mo Xiaoza for a long time, Jin Wan was not used to the enthusiasm of Mo Jingshan's mother. She was pulled to sit on the sofa and didn't take off her coat, so she hurriedly nodded. It's all right. Dad went to the hospital to visit him a few days ago. He was resting at that time, so he didn't see him, but Jingshan has always been in good health. Chapter 342. Jin Wan sat here, exchanging pleasantries with Mo Jingshan's mother. When Mo Jingshan entered the door, he saw Jin Wan's spoiled expression. The living room was very hot. Not far away, there was a common Western fireplace on the wall facing her. The little woman seemed to have forgotten to take off her coat. At this moment, not knowing whether it was because of embarrassment or the heat, her face was faintly red. Mo Jingshan raised his eyebrows slightly, and his eyes revealed a slight smile. If you don't take off your coat, I'll roast you for New Year's Eve dinner. Wanju came to herself and looked at Jin Wan with a smile. Girl, why didn't you take off your coat when you came in? It's 27 degrees in this room. It's so hot. Give me your coat, and I'll ask someone to hang it up for you. Jin Wan hurriedly took off her coat, handed it to the servant who came over, and nodded to the servant to thank her. Mrs. Wanju seemed to find that Jin Wan was very different from when she first got married. She smiled. The last time I saw you was at your wedding with Jingshan. You were actually very shy of strangers at that time, weren't you? Now it seems that the relationship between you two is getting better and better, and you're no longer so distant to me? I was a little shy that day and wasn't very polite. Please don't mind. Jin Wan was a little embarrassed because of this. I don't mind. When I was young and just got married, I was also very disgusted with the relatives of the Mo family. I didn't know any of them, but every one of them had to greet me. I was very annoyed, but I still had to keep smiling. I know this feeling too well. After a while, I'll get used to it. Wanju said as she turned to look at Mo Jingshan. Jingshan, are you really not badly hurt? I heard you were in the hospital for a long time. I'm fine now. Mo Jingshan was gentle to his mother. His tone was gentle, which was completely different from the coldness he showed to Mo Xiaoza. That's good. You haven't been back for a long time. Since you brought Wan back this time, why don't you stay at home for a few days? Anyway, everyone in China is on vacation. If there's nothing urgent, don't rush back. I'll see. It was rare that Mo Jingshan did not directly reject her. At this time, Elder Su and Su Jilan entered the door with Mo Xiaoza. Seeing that Jin Wan was chatting with Mo Jingshan's mother, Elder Su said with a smile, the news of Jingshan's marriage is really sudden. I didn't know it at all. I didn't expect that I would be so lucky to meet Mrs. Mo this year. Jin Wan heard the voice and turned around. She stood up and politely nodded at Elder Su. Hello. Elder Su nodded at her with a smile. Although he was smiling, his eyes were obviously not smiling. After looking at her for a while, he turned to talk to Mo Xiaoza. Jin Wan's eyes met Su Jilan's, but Su Jilan looked away thoughtfully. Jin Wan, who was being called daughter-in-law by Mo Jingshan's mother, obviously did not intend to look directly at her. When Jin Wan sat down again, Mo Jingshan had put down his coat. He hadn't been back to the company for a while, so there was no need to wear the identity of COMO all the time. He was tall and straight, and the paleness and weakness he had shown in the hospital a few days ago had faded away. At this time, he was only wearing a white sweater, and straight trousers wrapped his slender legs neatly. He was dressed fashionably and stood out in this Western-style villa that did not have much spring festival atmosphere. He sat on the sofa on the same side as Jin Wan somewhat lazily. When he heard Wanju asking about Jin Wan, he smiled and looked at them silently. Mo Jingshan hadn't been back for many years. Even the servants who had watched him grow up didn't know whether to call him young Master Mo or COMO like everyone else. An older servant seemed particularly happy to see him back. She came up to him and stuffed a freshly washed red apple into his hand. With one look, he knew that the other party must have watched him grow up. Mo Jingshan did not refuse. He sat there, holding a red apple in his hand. His fingers were long and slender, with distinct joints. Perhaps because he had stayed in the hospital for a long time, and had not been exposed to the sun for a long time, his skin was fairer than before. The difference between his fair skin and the red of the apple was obvious. He smiled mildly, and casually asked the old helper a few questions. It seemed like only in front of his mother and the Mo family's old helpers would Mo Jingshan put on a different kind of temperament. He was as warm as jade, amiable, and much warmer than his usual attitude toward people. Afterward, Elder Su and the others were invited by Mo Xiaoza to sit opposite them and chat. When they talked about the reason for their marriage, Mo Jingshan's expression was as usual. His gaze swept across their faces one by one. Today is the Chinese New Year. It's a day for family reunions. It doesn't seem like we should talk about my marriage. Su Jilan then said. Yes, it's also the first time that Jin Wan has come to the Mo family. She should not be very familiar with the inside and outside of the house. Grandpa, if you talk to Uncle Mo like this, she will feel uncomfortable. I'm fine, Jin Wan said. After all, this is our home. Why should I feel uncomfortable? The smile on Su Jilan's face disappeared. She paused and then said, That's good. I can see that Auntie Zhu is very warm to you. As if she is afraid that you will not be used to it. I was going to let Auntie Zhu do her work first, and I'll accompany you to walk around the Mo family. With that, Su Jilan chuckled again, as if she did not see Jin Wan's indifferent expression and perfunctory attitude. She said with a smile, The Mo family in the United States should be very different from the Mo family in High City, right? There are several Roman statues collected by Uncle Mo in the 1980s. Every time I see them, I'm amazed. Miss Ji, would you like to have a look? I'll show you the way. Jin Wan smiled lightly. I don't know much about Roman statues. Since Dad specially collects these, he must be an expert. As a layman, I'd better not make a fool of myself. It'll be embarrassing if I pretend to know something. Miss Ji, I just see that you don't seem to be used to the atmosphere and environment of the Mo family. So I want to take you out for a walk. Su Jilan smiled and said, It's just a tour. What does it have to do with whether I'm an expert or not? Wan, if you don't like it, you don't have to go to the back to see those things. Those are the things that Jingshan's father collected more than a decade ago. I usually don't bother to ask people to clean them up. Mrs. Wanzhu said at this time. Wan will stay here for the next 2 days. You have a lot of time to walk around at home. Now that you've just come back, sit for a while and have a good rest. There's no hurry. Chapter 343. Hearing this, Wanzhu's expression softened. Without waiting for Jin Wan to speak, she turned to Su Jilan, saying, Wan has been very reserved since she got married. She's so slow to warm up. It's rare for me to see her here. Don't scare my daughter-in-law. What if she doesn't dare to talk to me again? Su Jilan's expression froze slightly, and she smiled apologetically. Auntie Zhu, I was just saying. Mo Jingshan sat on the sofa on the same side as Jin Wan's mother. His eyes were cold, and he smiled without speaking. Jin Wan could see that Mo Jingshan's mother was obviously the same kind of person as grandfather Mo. She would definitely protect her own daughter-in-law. In this way, Mo Xiaoza was really a weirdo in this family. But it was no wonder that Mo Xiaoza, a powerful and cold-tempered man, hadn't been able to kick Jin Wan out of the Mo family. After all, the one who slept with him and his own father were on Jin Wan's side. He couldn't bear to have his wife give him gentle pillow talk every day. As for Su Jilan, she was obviously too confident today. Not to mention which side Mo Jingshan's mother was on. Mo Xiaoza really liked the Yin family, not the Su family that he had cooperated with a few years ago. The engagement between the Su family and the Mo family didn't last long. Jin Wan didn't know what kind of relationship the two families had, but from the way they sat and talked to each other, it was clear that they were mostly polite. At this time, Elder Su said, Jingshan, you can't blame Jilan for being so concerned about your family. After all, your marriage is such a big deal. It doesn't matter if other people don't mind. But how can Jilan not mind? She was once part of your life plan, but now you've excluded her. Miss Ji is now your wife, so it's not an exaggeration for the Mo family to treat her so passionately. Jilan only said a few words of concern. There's no need to treat her so coldly. I only have one granddaughter, Jilan. After a brief pause, Elder Su said in a meaningful tone, I'm already old, and I don't really understand the emotional issues between young people, so I can't get involved. I only have one granddaughter, Jilan. Her parents were in the capital of a war-torn country when they drove past a bomb-filled road after discussing business. Not even a complete corpse could be found. I personally raised this granddaughter of mine. You can say that I'm biased or spoiling her, But you broke off the engagement just like that, and returned to High City to marry another woman. Don't you think you should give the Su family an explanation for this? The window paper that had not been broken was instantly broken by Elder Su. Mo Xiaozi frowned deeply, and Wan Zhu, who was sitting by Jin Wan's side, fell silent when Elder Su mentioned Su Zhilan's parents. Mo Jingshan smiled, and looked at Su Zhilan with a faint smile. Miss Su, do you need me to repeat the reason for the cancellation of the engagement in public? Su Zhilan knew that she was in the wrong when she cooperated with Mo Xiaozi, and lied that she had saved him, but now Mo Jingshan had put it on the table. If she didn't stop him at this time, she and her grandfather would be humiliated, and she wouldn't be able to force Jin Wan to leave. I understand the reason, Su Zhilan said with an understanding expression. I can understand why Jingshan left the United States, and I don't want to force him to be too responsible for me. Since he loves someone else, and doesn't even mention the engagement, I can only wish Miss Ji and Jingshan a happy marriage. Mo Jingshan didn't hesitate at all. He said flatly and coldly, there was indeed an engagement between Miss Su and me. As for the so-called love and responsibility you mentioned, it's just a question of the benevolent and the wise. Jin Wan is my wife. She didn't interfere in any of my relationships, so there's no need for anyone to point fingers and talk about our engagement. I don't need to explain the truth in detail. Miss Su and Elder Su should understand it. Even if it's for the sake of the past, you shouldn't be so heartless to Zhilan. If it were a few years ago, Elder Su could still stand up and point at Mo Jingshan's face and scold him as an elder, but now he could only complain with an ugly face. Elder Su, do you mean that after I get married, I still have to care about my ex and take her feelings as my responsibility? Mo Jingshan's tone was as cold as frost, but the sneer in his eyes was obvious. Jingshan, we're guests at the Mo family today. We're just talking about the past. After all, Zhilan has waited for you for so many years. She's spent her best years waiting for you. As her grandfather, it's not too much for me to ask for an explanation for her. Seeing Mo Jingshan's cold attitude, Elder Su finally expressed his dissatisfaction. Hearing this, Jin Wan suddenly said, Miss Su, how old are you? 24? The people in the living room suddenly fell completely silent, and almost everyone's eyes fell on her. Jin Wan didn't have any intention of backing down. She even faced everyone's different gazes and looked at Su Zhilan with clear eyes. 24 years old is considered a good time? Isn't the golden age for women between 20 and 35 years old? Almost everyone in their teens has the experience of losing the person they love. If everyone holds the person they loved in their teens accountable like this, then there will be too many people in debt in this world. Elder Su's eyes darkened. Miss Ji, are you clear about what happened between Jingshan and Zhilan? Back then, Zhilan almost married him. Jin Wan smiled lightly and said unhurriedly, with your experience, Elder Su, I don't think you need me to explain to you how much this so-called almost is. There's no turning back in life. It's fine that you like to reminisce when you're old, but Miss Su, you're still young, and you're always clinging to what you didn't get in the past. What's the point of that? Are you going to ask me, your legal wife, to back out of the marriage just because you're not reconciled to the fact that you're a little bit short, and then ask her to make up for it? The air was filled with silence and embarrassment. Of course, it wasn't Jin Wan who was embarrassed. She was clearly saying that Su Zhilan relied on Elder Su's support, and even said that it was natural for her to interfere in someone else's marriage. Elder Su sat here as if questioning Mo Jingshan with the attitude of a dignified elder. Who did he think he was? There was really no one in this world that Jin Wan didn't dare to offend. If others were polite to her, she would naturally be polite. But this boss Su brought Su Zhilan to her door during the new year. And what was an ex-girlfriend? Chapter 344. Elder Su didn't expect Jin Wan dared to speak like this. His face darkened in an instant. Mo Xiaozi knew he was in the wrong, so he didn't say anything because he had been involved in this matter with the Su family. Su Zhilan was so angry that she didn't show her emotions, but her eyes were fixed on Jin Wan. Everyone, seeing Su Zhilan's restrained gaze, Emo Jingshan took Jinwan's hand and stood up. His face was as calm as water, and he maintained his usual reserved modesty on certain occasions, but his eyes were cold. I'm sorry, Nuan is pregnant now, and is not suitable for such an occasion. It will affect her mood. I'll take her back to the room first. If Elder Su and Miss Su sincerely want to stay here for the New Year's Eve dinner, the Emo family welcomes you two to stay for the New Year's Eve dinner. But if you have other places to go, please take care. With that, he took Jinwan's hand and turned upstairs. He didn't walk fast, but he didn't look back, without the slightest hesitation or courtesy. Jinwan didn't say anything and obediently followed him. Compared with Su Jilan, who took the initiative to show her around the Emo family, she certainly preferred to have Emo Jingshan take her upstairs to have a look. And the atmosphere in the living room was really not good right now, so she didn't want to be entangled too much. Emo Jingshan's attitude was even colder than hers. This man did not restrain himself at all, and even clearly ignored the Su family, not even giving face to Emo Xiaoza and Wanju, especially Su Jilan. Su Jilan's face didn't show much emotion, but her eyes were cold. Wanju and Emo Xiaoza didn't react for a moment. What did Emo Jingshan say just now? Jinwan was pregnant. Jingshan. Wanju immediately sat up from the sofa and was about to go to the stairs to ask, but the two of them had gone upstairs and didn't look back at all. At this time, Wanju turned to look at Emo Xiaoza. Emo Xiaoza frowned, and his expression was not very satisfied. Elder Su had obviously come here with a purpose. He originally wanted Emo Jingshan to solve this matter by himself, but now he had walked away freely, leaving this mess to Wanju. But Jinwan's pregnancy was really unexpected. When Elder Su heard that Jinwan was pregnant, his face darkened to the extreme. He was about to get up and take Su Jilan back, but Su Jilan pressed his hand hard. Grandpa, it's okay. Su Jilan lowered her eyes and said softly, Miss Ji is Jingshan's wife now. It's natural for him to be so protective of his wife. Our attitude was indeed a bit harsh. Jingshan doesn't owe me anything. Hearing this, Emo Xiaoza said, that's right. Talking about this kind of thing will only add to our troubles. If we can't become in-laws, the friendship between our Emo and Su families won't change. Elder Su, you should take it easy. Now that Jinwan is pregnant as her father, I can't say anything more. Wanju smiled. Today is the spring festival in our country. Since we're having a reunion dinner together, let's be friendly and lively. Let's put the past behind us. Jilan's conditions are so good, and there are so many men who are even more outstanding than Jingshan pursuing her. Our son may look pleasing to the eye, but his personality is actually very dull. Even if we're together, we might not be happy. At this moment, Jinwan was holding the hand of a certain great CEO Mo as they toured the second floor of the Los Angeles Mo family home. At the end of the corridor, they pushed open the balcony window and walked out. Immediately, they could see the Roman statues Su Jilan had mentioned earlier. They were indeed very old, and one look was enough to tell that they were very valuable. These Roman statues from the 1980s were enough to buy her entire studio. They were really not things that ordinary people could afford to collect. Part of the pavilion behind was covered in ice and snow, but there were still several quiet paths that had been cleaned up. Several European-style buildings and lofts were neatly arranged. Do you want to stay here tonight? Emo Jingshan's well-defined fingers threaded through her hair and touched her head. Sure, it doesn't matter where we stay. Anyway, this place is so big, and your mother seems to like me very much. There won't be any pressure staying here. Jinwan abruptly turned around and leaned against the balcony, raising her head to look at the tall man. No wonder grandfather specifically used your mother's matter to mock dad. As expected, your parents' personalities are not on the same level. Emo Jingshan smiled. Then let's stay here for one night and leave tomorrow in? All right. It got dark quickly. When Jinwan went downstairs with Emo Jingshan, she found that Elder Su and Su Jilan had not left. Elder Su and Emo Xiaoza had just opened a bottle of good wine, and Su Jilan was pouring wine for them. The tense atmosphere in the afternoon seemed to have disappeared. Seeing Jinwan come downstairs, Wanju immediately came up to her and asked eagerly, Daughter-in-law, are you really pregnant? Jinwan nodded. Less than 2 months. The doctor said the fetus was not very stable, so I didn't dare to tell you about it so early. It doesn't matter if the fetus is unstable. When I was pregnant with Jingshan, the fetus was also unstable. I just need to lie down and rest. Wanju immediately looked at Mo Jingshan with a smile. No wonder you want to take Jinwan back to the room to rest. You are much more reliable than your father. You even know how to dote on your wife. When I was pregnant with you, I had a stomachache every day, but your father didn't care about anything except sending me to the hospital with a sullen face. He didn't even care about me. He was not considerate at all. Mo Xiaoza, who had just clinked glasses with Elder Su and taken a sip of wine on the sofa. When Wanju took Jinwan to sit down, she leaned close to Jinwan and whispered, Miss Su and Elder Su won't go back tonight. They will stay here for the night. The Su family and the Mo family are old friends. What happened in the afternoon was a bit too hurtful to Elder Su. Tonight, let him have a few drinks with Jingshan's father to ease the relationship. If you don't like to face them, go back to the room with Jingshan after dinner. Don't worry about being polite. I understand. With such a reasonable mother-in-law, no matter how much she didn't like having New Year's Eve dinner with Su Zhilan, Jinwan could bear it with a smile. It's all right. There's nothing I don't want to face. And it's not just a matter of politeness. I can distinguish between the host and the guest. Don't worry, I won't mind. Jinwan winked at her. Wanju patted Jinwan's shoulder and winked at her. Chapter 345. After the reunion dinner, Wanju urged Mo Jingshan to bring Jinwan back to the room. Even Jinwan herself could tell that Mo Jingshan's mother didn't intend to let her sit at the same dining table with the Su family for too long. She used the excuse that Jinwan needed more rest during her pregnancy to urge her. After returning to the room, Jinwan took a look at the time. It was still morning in China. She sent New Year's greetings to all her colleagues in the studio, and then called Ji Hongwen. After learning that there was still no news from Ji Mengran, she accompanied Ji Hongwen for a few words. After hanging up the phone, Jinwan felt uncomfortable that she could not rush back to accompany Ji Hongwen for the new year. She did not know how he would deal with Shenharu's matter, but the Ji family must be very cold this year. She turned to enter the bathroom and soaked for a long time. When she was about to fall asleep, she suddenly heard the door open. She turned to see that Mo Jingshan had entered. She was still in a daze when he carried her out of the bathtub. You didn't continue chatting with Dad and Elder Su? Jinwan's body was wet. She was afraid that she would wet his clothes, but seeing that he did not seem to mind, she did not resist. Before she was carried out of the bathroom, she grabbed a towel by the side and wrapped it around herself, lest she was carried out naked. It's getting late. It's more important to accompany you. Mo Jingshan carried her to the bed, lowered his head and kissed her lips. His dark gaze fell on her collarbone and shoulders that were still wet. He closed his eyes and restrained himself before lifting a corner of the towel to help her dry her dripping hair. In the end, Jinwan sat on the bed and obediently allowed Mo Jingshan to dry her hair. She held her chin with one hand and looked at the balcony by the side of the room. Mrs. Wanju is really a good mother-in-law. When you were engaged to Su Zhilan, was she also this good to Miss Su? Mo Jingshan's long and slender fingers ran through her hair. He said calmly, At least it was much better than our current estranged relationship. Now, in the face of such a huge emotional gap in all aspects, Miss Su is still able to persevere in having a reunion dinner with us here. It's really admirable. But your mother is really a good person. She's definitely a mother-in-law with a high EQ. Before coming back here, I didn't expect to have such a mother-in-law. I thought that except for grandfather Mo, no one else in the Mo family likes me. Mo Jingshan's eyes lit up. Don't worry. Grandfather Mo Jingshan's gaze was calm and distant. He touched her dry hair and put the hairdryer aside. His palm landed on her shoulder, saying, Because she knows that my wife is you, and I am indeed her son. She knows in her heart who she should side with. Jinwan thought about Mo Jingshan's mother's actions today. She was extremely considerate towards outsiders, and especially biased towards her family. She was indeed a mother-in-law who knew what she was doing. It was not yet midnight. The servant said that there were fruit platters, candies and snacks downstairs. Jinwan had been in a lot of trouble since she became pregnant. Today the problem of gluttony of pregnant women was highlighted. While Mo Jingshan was taking a shower, she pushed open the door and was about to go downstairs to get some snacks. As soon as she went out, she heard some noise at the staircase. She and Mo Jingshan lived on the 3rd floor. As soon as she came to the 2nd floor, she saw Su Jilan standing at the staircase. She seemed to be passing by, but she clearly wasn't. Su Jilan also glanced at her, and then looked behind Jinwan, only to find that Mo Jingshan didn't come out with her. She didn't see him. "Miss Ji, you're pregnant. Congratulations." Su Jilan leaned against the railing and stared at Jinwan. Jinwan didn't expect Su Jilan to suddenly say this. She stopped. Jinwan had heard more than once that Su Jilan had mania, so she instinctively didn't approach her, but stood half a floor away from her on the stairs. "Miss Su, why aren't you resting at this late hour?" "I can't sleep." Seeing that Jinwan deliberately kept a distance from her, Su Jilan moved her eyebrows slightly, raised her feet, and walked towards Jinwan step by step. Seeing her come up like this, Jinwan didn't think she would do anything so blatantly. Besides, mania, which was an uncontrollable emotion, usually had a temporary reason, but Su Jilan looked too calm now. But Jinwan still instinctively walked to the other side, until she could hold the railing. She put her hand on the railing, and put some strength on it, lest any accident happened. "I hope my grandfather's words didn't hurt you today." When Su Jilan approached her, she said, "Miss Ji, please be magnanimous and don't take it to heart. After leaving the hospital that day, I actually thought about it a lot. Since Jingshan has chosen you, this marriage is already a very legal fence. Besides, you are pregnant. This is a responsibility for Jingshan. At this point, I can't do anything even if I want to. Although I'm still a little unwilling, I can understand." Su Jilan's tone was natural, and her expression was sincere. Unfortunately, Jinwan could hear the aggressiveness in her words, which seemed to be a concession. Was Su Jilan saying that Mo Jingshan was just a shackle of marriage, and a responsibility he had to bear? "I think Miss Su may have grown up in the United States, so you still don't know the proper usage of some Chinese words. The word understand can't be used in this way." Jinwan smiled lightly. "There are many things that don't need to be repeated." "Miss Su, you know in your heart whether the fence in front of you is our marriage, or whether you have never really entered it. So how can you talk about breaking the fence?" Su Jilan looked at her, and her eyes gradually turned cold. She finally regained her pride, and the coldness on her face showed that she was deeply hurt by Jinwan's words. "Furthermore, Miss Su, since you've investigated me, you should know that Chairman Mo isn't particularly satisfied with me. However, under these circumstances, when Elder Su questioned me this afternoon, he chose to remain silent. It's obvious that he isn't very satisfied with you either. In terms of the Mo family alone, you've already been rejected." Jinwan's tone was cold and indifferent. She didn't deliberately highlight anything, but these honest words were the most hurtful. Su Jilan stopped talking to her, and suddenly turned to go downstairs. Jinwan looked at her back, and didn't lift her hand from the railing until she was far away. She looked down at her slightly sweaty palm, and couldn't help laughing. Chapter 346. Early the next morning, Jinwan got up early and accompanied Ms. Wanzhu to the kitchen to study some desserts. She had heard from Mo Jingshan that his mother often studied health and was very good at all kinds of food. However, there were many servants at home, so she didn't need to do anything, but she still found opportunities to study all kinds of delicious food in the kitchen. Jinwan was helping to stir the eggs when she was suddenly fed a mouthful of peanut butter, which was sweet and fragrant. "How does it taste?" Wanzhu looked at her with shining eyes, looking forward to her daughter-in-law's praise. Jinwan smiled, and licked the remaining peanut butter from the corner of her lips. She smacked her lips and said, not fully satisfied, "It's especially delicious." It's definitely the best peanut butter I've ever tasted in my life. Knowing that this little girl was just flattering her, Wanju happily fed her another mouthful, and then turned to make the cake, saying, "You and Jingshan have been living in the Yu garden, haven't you? I'm familiar with Auntie Chen, and know she's good at cooking. Are you used to it?" "Auntie Chen cooks very well, and I'm not picky." Wanju looked at Jin Wan stirring the eggs in the blender and asked with a smile, "Do you know how to cook?" Jin Wan paused, looked down at her barely professional cooking skills, and answered, "I know a little, but I'm not very good at it. It's enough for me to be self-sufficient. But when Jingshan cooks, the food he cooks is much better than what I cook." Wanju turned to look at her in surprise. "Jingshan has cooked for you?" "Yes. My son is really biased. He has never cooked for me and his father even once in his life, let alone food. He hasn't even drunk a cup of tea that he personally poured for us." Wanju sighed as she said, "If you hadn't told me, I wouldn't have known that he had such an ability." "That's right. Jin Wan. Your son's ability is really great." Jin Wan stayed in the Mo family until noon, occasionally chatting with Mo Jingshan's mother, and learning how to make various kinds of coffee from the servants of the Mo family. When Elder Su and Su Jilan left, Jin Wan didn't go out. Anyway, no one asked her to see them off, and she didn't bother to listen to what Su Jilan had to say before she left. In the evening, Ms. Wanju urged Jin Wan to go back to her room for an afternoon nap. When she got up, it was already sunset. Originally, she thought they could have dinner here. After all, it was rare for them to have such a peaceful and leisurely moment. As soon as Mo Xiaoza put down the phone, he informed the servants at home, "Prepare a few more sets of cutlery. The Yin family will be here in a while." The servant responded and left. The hall suddenly fell into silence. Jin Wan raised her eyebrows. Did they all come together? Miss Su had just left at noon, and now Miss N was coming in the evening. She abruptly turned to look at Mo Jingshan. The man standing beside her slowly put one hand into his trouser pocket. His thin lips curved into a cold smile. "The Mo family is particularly lively this year. Wan needs to rest now. A lively environment is not good for her. I'll take her away first." With that, he took Jin Wan's hand and turned to leave. He still walked away without any hesitation. Mo Xiaoza immediately frowned. Before he spoke, Wanju suddenly tugged at his arm, glared at him, and said in a low voice, "Aren't you clearly driving them away? The Su family came here on their own accord. What do you think of the Yin family? It's not easy for Jingshan to bring his daughter-in-law back to stay for a night during the new year. I've been coaxing Jin Wan to stay a few more days, but now you're driving them away." Mo Xiaoza's face suddenly turned cold, and his eyes were filled with anger. "Don't meddle in this kind of thing. The Yin family just came to visit. Jin Wan is pregnant. What else can I do? You know Wan is pregnant? Then why did you drag these people to her? You're on good terms with the Yin family, but Wan is pregnant with our own grandson. Don't you know who's close?" The black Bentley drove out of the Mo family's villa in Los Angeles under the setting sun. Mo Jingshan's well-defined fingers gripped the steering wheel. He stared straight ahead, indifferent and clear, with a hint of coldness. Jin Wan sat in the passenger seat and looked at the man's profile. "It's getting dark. Where are we going?" She had been in the hospital for a long time, since she came to Los Angeles. In the 2 days after she was discharged, she stayed at 11 Base and stayed at the Mo family's home. Jin Wan felt that she might have to stay in a hotel with him tonight. The man didn't answer her. After a moment of silence, he said in a low, indifferent voice, "You didn't eat much at noon. Do you want to eat out tonight? Or do you want me to cook for you when we go back?" "Go back? Go back to where?" Jin Wan was confused. He said, "I've been in Los Angeles for so long. I can't not have a place of my own." "Oh, you haven't been back for so long. Can you move in? There will be someone to clean it every day. You can move in at any time. I don't think there are any ingredients at home." Jin Wan's mouth was really spoiled by Mo Jingshan. Between going to a restaurant for dinner and going home to eat the food he cooked, she would definitely choose the latter. The black Bentley stopped in the parking lot of a large American supermarket chain. Mo Jingshan took a look at the time and said, "Go buy it. If it's too late, Just buy the ingredients today and eat out. You can put the food in the fridge and cook it tomorrow. There's still time. All right. In fact, it was really late. It had been more than 50 minutes since they drove from the Mo family's home. She still didn't know where Mo Jingshan lived in Los Angeles. However, Mo Jingshan was obviously not in a good mood. Perhaps Mo Xiao's attitude just now annoyed him. She didn't say much, unfastened her seatbelt, got out of the car, and followed him to the supermarket. The two bought a lot of ingredients and fruits. Mo Jingshan also helped her get a box of maternity milk powder from the shelf. All kinds of things were piled up in the shopping cart. If Jin Wan hadn't stopped him, he would have looked at other nutrition and pregnancy essentials in the maternity section. She finally took him to the cashier to pay the bill. When they were about to go to the parking lot, Mo Jingshan put his arm around her shoulder and took her to the apartment across the road that was more than 80 stories high. Jin Wan didn't react at first. She wanted to say that he was carrying so many things in that hand. Was he not going to drive? Chapter 347. She didn't expect that Mo Jingshan's residence in Los Angeles was near the most prominent landmark in Los Angeles. She returned to his home many years ago and entered the door. The purely masculine facilities showed that he had lived here alone for a long time. It was getting late. Mo Jingshan told Jin Wan the direction of the bedroom, bathroom, and study, picked out the ingredients in the shopping bag, and methodically put the rest into the refrigerator. Then he washed a peach and handed it to the woman who had just finished shopping here. I don't have your clothes here. Go to the closet and find a shirt to wear after taking a shower. Jin Wan took the peach and took a bite. Her mouth was full, and she answered with a smile. Okay, do you need my help? There's no need. Just wait here obediently. Okay. Jin Wan wandered around his place again. When she went to the kitchen with the peach pit, she saw that the man's sleeves were rolled up, and his tall and slender back was washing various ingredients by the sink. She pursed her lips, threw the peach pit away, and tiptoed over to hug him from behind. However, as soon as her hand reached out, the man suddenly said indifferently, Do you like it here or High City? Jin Wan paused, then chuckled, reached out to hug him, and pressed against his back. Do you have eyes on the back of your head? Mo Jingshan didn't look back, let her hold him, and continued to wash his vegetables. I like any place where you are, but relatively speaking, I'm used to living in High City, and there aren't so many things to do. There are still a lot of things waiting for me in the studio. If I can go back to High City earlier, I'll definitely choose to go back earlier. Shine Group will hold a Chinese New Year's dinner party in 4 days. We'll go back after the dinner. So soon? My injuries are no longer serious. There's no need to stay here for too long. Jin Wan rubbed her face against the man's back. Don't worry about me. You have a lot of things to do in the United States. The Mo Corporation is very stable. If Dad insists on letting you take over Shine, you'll have to come to the United States sooner or later. I can't tie you to High City for the rest of your life. I don't mind being tied to you anywhere. The man dried his hands, turned back, and patted her on the head. Stand aside. I'll cut the vegetables. With that, he began to cut the vegetables. It was just the movement of cutting vegetables, but it was so smooth and handsome that people couldn't take their eyes off it. Jin Wan looked at his profile and movements, pursed her lips, and did not speak for a while. She did like High City, but she didn't forget that Mo Jingshan belonged to Shine, either in this life or in this life. Although there was no difference between taking over earlier and a few years later, many things had changed dramatically in her two lives. She wondered if it was too selfish of her to change Mo Jingshan's original life in the way she wanted it to be. Ji didn't seem to be able to help him. You High City. MOGT High T. Hi Jin Wan Jingshan Demo Shent. Hi Shen Xiao Hai Mo. G. T Angelus. T to say's time to say. Angelus G's Angelus. Ming no Ji was. Xiao Hai Angelus. Kanchi washed her hands, turned on the TV, and changed several channels out of boredom. Finally, she found a music station to listen to music, and then went to fetch the tableware. Mo Jingshan said he was in a hurry tonight, and only cooked a few dishes, but he still made several dishes, all of which were Jinwan's favorites. After dinner, it was past 9 o'clock in the evening. After dinner, Jinwan walked around the room twice and made a glass of the pregnant milk powder he bought for her. As she drank, she said, "I heard that pregnant milk powder will make you fat. Are you going to feed me into a ball in the first few months of my pregnancy?" Mo Jingshan smiled and gave her a new shirt. "I'm going to have a video conference. Take a shower if you're tired. Go to bed early." When Jinwan came out of the shower, Mo Jingshan was still in the study. It sounded like he was still in a meeting, dealing with some sudden problems in High City. After listening outside the study for a while, Jinwan quietly turned back to the bedroom and didn't go in to disturb him. Late at night, Mo Jingshan came out of the study and went to the bedroom. The bedroom was very quiet. Jinwan was wearing a white men's shirt and sleeping soundly. Her cell phone was still in her hand. He took it and took a look at it, knowing that she was texting Xia Tian before going to bed. In addition to asking Xia Tian who she was in love with, she also asked Xia Tian 3 times in a row if she was with the scumbag who hit her. The content of a woman's chat was different from that of a man's, and there were all kinds of sweetness and shyness in it. In her sleep, Jinwan was suddenly hugged. She opened her eyes in a daze, saw it was Mo Jingshan, and subconsciously burrowed into his arms. The man's low voice was against her ear. "What did you dream of?" Jinwan smiled innocently in his arms and said hoarsely, "I dreamed of my previous life. I was lying motionless in prison, and then you suddenly appeared." The space instantly fell into a strange silence. Mo Jingshan took the cell phone from her hand and threw it on the bedside table. He lowered his eyes to look at the woman who was half asleep and still thought she was in a dream. He looked at her fair face with his deep and shallow eyes. Jinwan suddenly woke up. She realized what she had just said and shrank back into his arms. Avoiding the man's probing gaze, she said in an indistinct voice, "Back when I was studying in T-City, I would randomly read some novels when I couldn't sleep at night. After reading too many novels about the fate of several lifetimes, I would often dream of these messy things. I even dreamed that you and I were immortals in the past. I even dreamed that you were an emperor, and I was a concubine. Then I was bullied by you every day. Prison, that was the first time I dreamed of it. I might have really been poisoned by those illogical novels." She vaguely explained a few more words, buried her head in his arms, and pretended to sleep again. It was just a dream, and he shouldn't take it too seriously. Mo Jingshan's breath lingered in her hair and neck, and there was a faint warmth that tickled her heart. She couldn't fall asleep for a while. A moment later, she heard the man's low voice by her ear. "What do I look like in your dream?" Had she been discovered pretending to be asleep? Chapter 348. But he asked, "What was that him like?" Jinwan's hand was pressed against the man's chest, her heart beating abnormally, and she was really immersed in that dream. In the dream, the man who suddenly rushed in the moment she fell to the ground with blood dripping from the corner of her mouth was not much different from him now, except that his hair was shorter and finer than it was now. 10 years had not left any trace on his body at all. She couldn't see his expression clearly in the dream, just like how she couldn't touch him in those 10 years. He was very far away and unreachable. Jinwan answered gloomily in his arms, "Anyway, he's handsome." The man's slender fingers suddenly straightened her face, his forehead pressed against hers, and he said hoarsely, "Really?" Jinwan suddenly didn't dare to look into his eyes. She glanced at him and hurriedly nodded. "Really?" Mo Jingshan pinched her chin, lowered his head and kissed her. When he was done, he purposely bit down on her lips and licked the corner of her lips. "Do I kiss you like this in your dreams?" Jinwan. Of course not. That him was someone she couldn't even see if she wanted to. She pressed her back against the bed, closed her eyes, and turned her back to him, answering vaguely, "Anyway, I'm not as naughty as you are now. I'm going to sleep. Aren't you sleepy? And I'll hold you to sleep." He was behind her, holding her in his arms. Shine Group's cooperation dinner was held 4 days later, which was equivalent to the 5th day of the year, according to the Chinese New Year. After all, It was a Chinese company, and it had many connections with many Chinese companies, so it was indeed very suitable to hold a dinner party on this day. In addition to the cooperation of various companies, such a dinner party was also held because of the New Year's atmosphere, so it was not too serious. There was a lot of food and drinks. Because Jean Wan was pregnant, she didn't wear a tight dress, but bought a loose doll dress suitable for the dinner party. She tried on a white chiffon dress. She originally wanted to wear high heels, but Mo Jingshan refused. She was not allowed to wear high heels because she was pregnant, so she had to change into a pair of flats. Tonight's banquet, Nan Heng was also present. Feng Ling was also present. She didn't wear a formal dress, but still wore that cool black outfit. As soon as Jean Wan saw Feng Ling, she asked Mo Jingshan to greet the executives of those companies first, so that he wouldn't have to worry about whether she was suitable for the smell of alcohol, and refuse others' toasts every time. Mrs. Mo, why don't you go with CEO Mo? Seeing Jean Wan suddenly come over, Feng Ling asked in confusion. He's already introduced me to everyone, but it's really inconvenient for him to take care of me all the time. I said I wanted to come over to chat with you, so he let me come over. Jean Wan blinked at her and then glanced at Nan Heng. Did you come with him? Feng Ling's expression did not change. He is the boss of the base and also my boss. He asked me to come, so I came. Why are you in such a hurry to distance yourself? I didn't say anything. Jean Wan was about to take Feng Ling inside, to find a place with fewer people to stay for a while, when she suddenly caught a glimpse of An Shuyan. An Shuyan came with the An family, and did not stand by Mo Xiao's side today. She also saw Jean Wan. When their eyes met, An Shuyan smiled politely at Jean Wan, looked away, and stepped on the red carpet to the VIP area inside with the An family. You've been in the United States for so long. How much do you know about the companies and families that Shine Group often deals with? Jean Wan picked up a glass of champagne, and played with it in her hand, as if casually asking Feng Ling next to her. Feng Ling decisively took the glass from her hand, stuffed a glass of juice into her hand, and answered. The dozens of Chinese companies present today are all closely related to Shine Group, but there are also people like Miss An and Miss Su who are related to Mr. Mo. But most of them admire Mr. Mo. There are also many young ladies from aristocratic families who have been neglected by him many years ago. Miss Su is entangled with Mr. Mo only because she had a relationship with Mr. Mo a few years ago, and Miss An is the one that Mo Xiaoza sincerely wants to matchmake. As for the others, I basically can't remember their names. Jean Wan raised her eyebrows. Based on this situation, in fact, Mo Jingshan and Mo Xiaoza were both very principled people. At least one of them had a relationship with Mr. Mo, and the other was the daughter-in-law that Mo Xiaoza unilaterally wanted. As for the others, they were very common in the upper-class circle. Not to mention Mo Jingshan. Even she had been pursued by many men in the upper-class circle in China, but at that time, she was proud and arrogant and ignored everyone. She didn't have a complicated relationship with anyone, except for Sheng Yihan. However, she kept him at arm's length, and didn't have the slightest ambiguous relationship with him. Thinking of this, Jean Wan felt more or less at ease. It was just the love between some young men and women in the circle. People couldn't control other people's love for them. Not to mention that her husband was really outstanding. When Elder Su came with Su Jilan, many people present must have attended the engagement party of Su Jilan and Mo Jingshan. In an instant, many people looked at Su Jilan, and from time to time, some young ladies glanced meaningfully at Jean Wan. But what really attracted Jean Wan's attention was not these people, but the person who came with Su Jilan, Su Shuwei. After that soul-stirring farewell in Tea City, Jean Wan had thought that she would never see Su Shuwei again in this life. Mo Jingshan looked at the door, and looked away from Su Jilan and Su Shuwei. At the same time, Jean Wan felt the man's eyes on her. She turned around and saw that Mo Jingshan had come over. Feng Ling, keep an eye on Madam. Mo Jingshan suddenly took a look at Feng Ling, as he took Jean Wan's hand. Feng Ling knew very well what the two young ladies of the Su family would do. The moment she saw Su Jilan and Su Shuwei, she instinctively raised her guard. She nodded, The red carpet in the banquet hall was in the middle, and there were many ways to go. But Su Zhilan seemed to deliberately pass here. She pulled Su Shui, who looked panic-stricken, to this side. When they passed by Jin Wan and Mo Jingshan, many people around them looked at them gossiping, wondering if there would be any sparks between Mo Jingshan's ex-fiancé and his current wife. Being glanced at by so many people, Jin Wan forced herself to look away, ignoring their boring gazes, and only looked at Su Shui. Chapter 349. Especially when she suddenly saw Jin Wan, Su Shui seemed to be stimulated. She stared at her with red eyes, turned around, and came straight to Jin Wan. Before Jin Wan could see what was going on with Su Shui, Mo Jingshan had quietly pulled her behind him, and his tall and straight figure stood in front of her. Jin Wan, why are you here? Su Shui stared at Jin Wan, as if she couldn't see anyone else. Su Shui was about to step forward, when Mo Jingshan's low, cold voice rang. Elder Su, what do you mean? Since Shui was frightened last time, she has been locked up at home. Isn't it the spring festival? We can't let the child stay in her room all day. Zhilan has the best relationship with her, so she took Shui here to relax while it's busy here. Shui's mental illness also needs to be exercised in crowded places. Maybe it will get better, Elder Su said with a smile. Mental illness? Jin Wan didn't expect Su Shui's current state to be a sign of mental illness, but Su Shui could call out her name just now. Could it be that Mo Jingshan, or Nan Heng, did something to Su Shui after that incident? Revenge must exist, but what kind of fright and revenge did she suffer to become like this? Su Shui had lost at least 10 pounds and her face was pale. She looked frightened and couldn't be provoked at all. She didn't look like she was pretending at all. Obviously she was really ill. Jin Wan didn't step forward. She just stood over Mo Jingshan's shoulder and looked thoughtfully at Su Shui, whose eyes were getting redder and redder as she stared at her. All right, Shui, Miss Ji is also here to attend the party. It's all over. She won't do anything to you anymore. Don't be afraid. Su Zhilan took Su Shui's hand and coaxed her in a gentle voice, like a good sister who doted on her cousin very much. But in an instant, the people around were a little surprised. No one knew how Su Shui became like this, but it seemed that it was all because of Jin Wan that Su Shui became so pitiful. Su Shui was afraid of Jin Wan? Putting aside how powerful the Su family's background was, Su Shui was the young lady of the Swan group. Of the Su family's daughters, one was robbed of her man, and the other was so frightened that she developed a mental illness. And it was all because of Jin Wan. For a moment, the people around them looked at Jin Wan with a strange look in their eyes. Jin Wan glanced expressionlessly at Su Zhilan, who was pulling Su Shui into the crowd. She really didn't expect that she would bring Su Shui to such a place. What was the point of beating around the bush? Mo Jingshan's hand tightened, as if to comfort her. Nguan Xian said, Zhilan, Xuan and Xuan, Su and Yen Mo Su, Su Nuan Ji, Su Xian Shui Ji Nuan Ji, Su Ji Nuan. Nuan, Mo Nuan Su Ji Xian Ji, Su Nuan Ji and Shui Ji, Xian Su Ji Jingshan. Mo Jingshan tightened his grip on her hand and looked back at her. Let's leave early for the party tonight. We won't stay here for long, eh? Jin Wan nodded subconsciously. Feng Ling, who was standing by her side, said in a low voice that only she and Mo Jingshan could hear. Su Shui planned the kidnapping of you in T City. She used to have connections with the underworld forces behind the Su family, so she was very bold and dared to cooperate with that kind of underground bar. After she was forcibly sent back to the United States, Nanheng sent Kei to teach her a lesson, and then she became like this. Jin Wan turned to meet Mo Jingshan's eyes and then to Feng Ling. What did Kei do to Su Shui? They just copied what she did at that time. They drugged her, kidnapped her, beat her, threatened her, and sold her to an underground bar in the United States. She was bought by 3 tall and strong black men, and was tortured by them for several days. When the Su family begged the police to save her, Su Shui was almost at her last breath. That terrible scene appeared in Jin Wan's mind again. If Mo Jingshan hadn't come in time, she might have been killed. What would have happened? Would she have been raped and then committed suicide? Or would she have been sold to countless people because she didn't even have the strength to commit suicide? Su Shui suffered such a fate because of herself. Since Kay and the others only copied what she did, she could only blame herself. However, after being frightened and being tortured by the 3 black men for a few days, it was not surprising that Su Shui had become this absent-minded and emaciated appearance. The Su family had gone far away. Mo Jingshan held Jinwan's hand and put her by his side, not leaving. When the banquet was at its climax, there was a burst of laughter and applause. It seemed that Mo Xiaozi was drinking and talking with several partners. Jinwan saw many people around her were applauding, so she also raised her hand and clapped. She looked around the crowd, but didn't see Su Shui and Su Jilan. Perhaps Su Shui's condition was too bad, and Su Jilan had succeeded in tricking Jinwan with Su Shui's excuse. So she had taken Su Shui away? Everyone raised their glasses and drank together. Jinwan didn't drink tonight because she was pregnant, but Mo Jingshan just smiled and held her hand calmly. This man was really good looking, especially when he smiled. The banquet went well. In the second half of the banquet, Jinwan touched her belly. She had to go to the bathroom frequently during her pregnancy. She said, "Jingshan, I'm going to the bathroom." At this time, a partner was talking with Mo Jingshan, and it was not convenient for Mo Jingshan to go to the ladies' room. He patted her hand and motioned for her to go to Feng Ling. "Let Feng Ling accompany you." Okay. Jinwan turned and went to Feng Ling. When she was about to go over, she suddenly saw that Nan Heng was pushing Feng Ling into a corner of the banquet hall. In the darkness of the corner, there seemed to be something ambiguous. Jinwan. It didn't seem appropriate to go there. She glanced over there, and then at the bathroom just a few steps behind her. On the other side, Feng Ling had just come out of the shackles of Nan Heng. She looked at the banquet hall expressionlessly, only to find that Jinwan, who had been following Mo Jingshan, was gone. Chapter 350. Just as Feng Ling was feeling suspicious, suddenly, a scream came from the bathroom not far away. Ah! The scream didn't sound like Jinwan, but it was drowned out by the bustling banquet hall. Only Feng Ling, who had just walked nearby, could hear it clearly. Feng Ling walked quickly to the women's bathroom and was about to push it open, only to find that the door was locked from the inside. "Mrs. Mo, are you in there?" Feng Ling frowned warily, pressed against the door, and asked in a low voice. It was quiet inside and no one answered. Even the person who screamed just now was silent. Feng Ling suddenly raised her foot and kicked the door hard. The loud crash startled everyone in the banquet hall. As the lock of the bathroom door was kicked down, Feng Ling quickly pushed the door open and searched inside with her sharp eyes. But there was no one in the bathroom. The scream just now was not Jinwan, but the things scattered on the floor of the bathroom were Jinwan's. A sharp pain came from her neck. Jinwan frowned and slowly opened her eyes in a daze. The first thing she saw was Su Shui holding a fruit knife with a crazed look in her eyes, pressing the sharp side of the knife against her neck. The pain and coldness on her neck gradually woke Jinwan up. She was about to shrink back when Su Shui moved the knife back with her. "What are you doing?" Jinwan's head hurt. For a moment, she couldn't remember how she was drugged, but Su Shui's eyes looked crazy. Her hair stood on end because of the other party's eyes. "Jinwan, you finally fell into my hands." Su Shui widened her eyes and stared at the faint trace of blood on Jinwan's white neck. As if stimulated by something more bloodthirsty, she smiled grimly and pressed the fruit knife harder against her carotid artery. "You ruined me. I'm going to kill you. Jinwan, I'm going to kill you." Jinwan felt that she was still under the effects of the drug and did not have much strength. However, she saw that Su Shui's hand that was holding the knife was trembling. She slowly raised her hand tentatively. While Su Shui was focused on pressing the knife into her neck, she abruptly raised her hand and used all her strength to hold onto her wrist. She then used some strength to force her wrist open and took the opportunity to snatch the knife away. Su Shui watched the opportunity to kill her disappear. She froze for a moment, looked at her empty hands, glared at Jinwan coldly, and raised her hands to strangle her neck. Jinwan, I want you to die. Su Shui, wake up. Jinwan avoided her hand and raised her arm to push her away. She turned to look at the scene outside the window, and her eyelids twitched. What was going on? Why were they in the car? Outside the car window, it looked like a highway. Both sides of the road were barren, and there was nothing. Suddenly being shouted at by Jinwan, Su Shui stared at her, trembling all over. Do you think you can still hurt me? Jinwan, even if you want to kill me, I'll die with you. I'll kill you first. Hearing this, Jinwan suddenly turned to look at Su Shui's crazy eyes. You didn't drug me? Su Shui acted as if she had heard a joke. You're still pretending? You relied on your ability to pretend to be innocent to make Mo Jingxian fall for you. Didn't you? It was you who drugged me. Fortunately, I woke up early. Fortunately, I put a knife in my bag before I went to the party. I can take your life anytime, anywhere. Not Su Shui. They were both drugged at the same time? Su Shui said, and was about to pounce on her again. Jinwan frowned and waved her away. Calm down first. While holding Su Shui's wrist, she looked up at the car. It was a new BMW speeding on the highway. She and Su Shui were in the back of the car, and there was a glass or thick plastic partition between them and the driver's seat in front of the car, so they couldn't see who was driving. Judging from the scene outside the window, the speed of the car was at least more than 150 miles per hour. Why were they drugged and brought into this car at the same time? Jinwan raised her hand and pressed her forehead. She remembered that when she went to the bathroom, she happened to see Su Shui in there. At that time, Su Shui was standing in front of the mirror in the bathroom and applying lipstick. She looked at Jinwan through the mirror, as if there was an abyss in her eyes that was about to swallow Jinwan. Her eyes were very strange, revealing the same madness and hatred as now. Jinwan only took 2 steps in and subconsciously wanted to retreat. She didn't want to be in the same place with such a mentally unstable person. However, before she went out, 2 women suddenly ran in behind her who were eager to go to the bathroom. She didn't see them clearly, but she did want to go to the bathroom at that time, and there was only one bathroom on that floor. Seeing that she and Su Shui were not alone here, Jinwan avoided Su Shui and went to the door a little farther on the other side. When she came out of the cubicle in the bathroom, Su Shui had disappeared. Then Jinwan went to wash her hands. As soon as she put her hands under the water, she suddenly heard a scream from the soundproof door nearest her. The voice sounded very much like Su Shui's. She shivered all over and instinctively turned to walk out. At that moment, the cubicle door behind her was opened with a bang, and someone rushed out. Before Jinwan could get out of the bathroom, she was dragged back, and the door of the bathroom was locked by the 2 strong women. A wet cloth covered Jinwan's mouth and nose, and the pungent smell made her more and more dazed until she lost consciousness. Everything happened in just 2 or 3 seconds, and she couldn't react at all. But she never expected that she and Su Shui would be drugged and taken away at the same time. Listen, now is not the time to be crazy. Jinwan looked out of the window at the highway and the deserted hills and rivers on both sides of the road, and said solemnly, "We may have been kidnapped at the same time. Who asked you to go to the party? Did Su Jilan invite you to go to the party with her? Or did you unilaterally take the initiative to go with her?" Su Shui stared at Jinwan. "Are you trying to drive a wedge between me and my cousin?" Chapter 351. Seeing Jinwan's cold and serious eyes, Su Shui was more or less shaken. Her slightly pale lips trembled before she reluctantly said, "Seeing that I've been locked up by my family for too long, my cousin's heart aches for me. She said she would take me out to relax." With that, she suddenly glared at Jinwan. "Don't try to sow discord between us. I'm very close to my cousin. Even if there was a kidnapping, it would have nothing to do with her." She was stupid. She didn't know that she had been used once, and now she was being used a second time. She didn't know how powerful her cousin was. If they really had a good relationship, Su Jilan would have stopped Su Shui from going to T-City to court her death from the very beginning. If it weren't for Su Jilan's pitiful and instigation, Su Shui, who was impulsive, wouldn't have been bold enough to run into Mo Jingxin's gun. And today, if Su Jilan didn't have a purpose, she wouldn't have taken Su Shui, who was so crazy, to the party. There was no way she could reason with a lunatic like this. Being driven at such a terrifying speed, Jinwan felt nauseous again. She didn't know if the drug had stimulated her, but from the moment she woke up, a certain part of her stomach had been throbbing in pain. Jinwan suppressed the panicky feeling of weightlessness, waved away Su Shui's hand that was about to pinch her shoulder, and patted the partition between her and the driver's seat. It was a layer of black glass and plastic, which should not be particularly strong. Jinwan patted it again, then looked down at the flat shoes on her feet, and then at the high heels on Su Shui's feet. She decisively bent down and took off her shoes. "What are you doing?" Su Shui's eyes were instantly filled with vigilance because of Jinwan's strange action. Jinwan ignored her, raised the strong heel of her shoe, and smashed it hard on the partition in front of her. Now the car was driving at such a terrible speed, and there were cars of all sizes on both sides from time to time, and she found that the car had been driving in a straight line. She had to find a way to stop the car. The heavy thud startled Su Shui and made her shrink aside. For a moment, she didn't know what to do with Jinwan's neck. Jinwan knew that for a person like Su Shui who was stimulated and a little crazy, such noise would affect her mood, so she just silently banged on the partition and didn't ask her any more questions. Now was not the time to bicker. The two of them were in the same boat. If something happened, both of them would either die or be injured. Jinwan smashed the partition hard several times, and a crack finally appeared in the middle. Jinwan's hand was a little numb, so she continued to smash it with the other hand. When a huge hole was smashed in the middle of the partition, Jinwan did not feel any joy or relief, but her heart sank in an instant. There was no one in front of the car. The car was actually driverless. From the time they were thrown into the car to the time they woke up, at least 10 minutes had passed. The car had been driving at a speed of 150 miles per hour. It was common to see a highway without any detours in the United States, but it was definitely not that simple to maintain the speed of the car with the two of them in it. "Now, do you still believe in your cousin?" Jinwan stared at the empty driver's seat and asked in a low voice. Su Shui looked shocked and didn't understand. What did the driverless car have to do with her relationship with Su Jilan? "Someone wants to use you to get rid of me, but they don't intend to let you live at all. Su Shui, you're really poor. You've done a lot of things for your cousin since you were a child, but in the end, it must be you who bear the responsibility, and your good sister, who is always protected by you, has always been like a cold blue lotus, untainted by the mud, hasn't she?" Jinwan gave her a sarcastic look. Su Shui sat stiffly in the back, as if she hadn't understood Jinwan's words. He was stupid enough to begin with. Now that he had gone crazy, it was even more incomprehensible. Jinwan withdrew her gaze from her, and quickly smashed the hole in front of her with the heel of her shoe, until most of the partition was smashed down. Then she crawled forward to the driver's seat, and raised her hand to control the steering wheel, only to find that not only was the car's speed fixed, but even the steering wheel was locked. She couldn't control the direction at all, let alone brake. Both the brakes and clutch were loose and completely useless. Jinwan lowered her head and looked down, only to find that the car had been modified. Several places under the seat had clearly been tampered with. She saw several thick red, yellow, blue, and green lines crisscrossing under the seat, and for a moment, she felt a chill down her spine. Could it be that this car was installed with a self-ignition system? Noticing Jinwan's pale face, Su Shui immediately trembled and leaned on the seat behind her. "Can you stop the car?" Jinwan glanced at her silently. Rather than saying that Su Jilan was manic, it was better to say that Su Jilan was a person who would do anything to achieve her goals. Her cousin, who was always considerate of her, was used by her to such an extent. Now, in order to get rid of her, she was even willing to sacrifice Su Shui's life. If they really died in this car, no one would consider whether Su Jilan was the culprit. because everyone knew that Su Shuai and Jin Wan had a grudge, and they also knew that Su Shuai hated Jin Wan. They also knew that Su Shuai was crazy, and a lunatic could do anything terrible. So such a crazy and terrible act of mutual destruction could only be done by Su Shuai, who was already crazy. By then, Su Shuai would be dead, and there would be no evidence. While successfully eradicating her rival in love, she could also be cleared of suspicion. Feng Ling had said that Su Zhilan was not simple. Sure enough, she was not simple. Jin Wan glanced at the wires hidden under the car. Her and Su Shuai's bags were gone, and there were no scissors or other tools at hand. It was impossible for high-heeled shoes to break such thick wires, and it was impossible for her hands to break them. The wires were not so long that they couldn't be pulled up and broken. Jin Wan raised her hand and moved the steering wheel a few more times, but there was nothing she could move. She looked at the car again, which had been set at 150 miles per hour, and then looked out the window at the scenery of the road that kept moving backward at a terrifying speed. From time to time, cars flew past or were overtaken by the car. Even if there was no end to this straight highway, even if the car could slowly stop when the fuel ran out, if the car was really installed with a self-ignition system, it could explode at any time. Maybe in a minute, maybe in half an hour. Unknown danger could happen at any time. Should she jump out of the car? Jump out of the car at 150 miles per hour. Chapter 352. Jin Wan covered her aching belly with her hand, and her eyes gradually turned red. If she jumped like this, even if she didn't die, she would be hurt. Not to mention she was pregnant. The other party really gave her a big problem. Jin Wan, why are you sitting here? Stop the car. Why don't you stop the car? Several cars passed by at a strange speed, making people panic. Su Shuai screamed from behind. Are you trying to kill me? Stop the car. Get out of the car if you want to live. This car can't be stopped. Jin Wan didn't bother to explain too much to her. She raised her hand and tried the car doors. As expected, they were all locked. Fortunately, the car was on land and not under water pressure. If there was no water pressure, she could use a sharp object to break the car window. Jin Wan knocked Su Shuai's high-heeled shoes on the car window several times. Her arms, which had been a little numb, were almost powerless now. She changed her hands to knock on the car window. In the end, she put on the high-heeled shoes that were a size larger than her feet, turned sideways on the seat, and kicked the car window hard with her foot. What are you doing? Su Shuai looked at her strange actions blankly. Don't talk so much nonsense. Jin Wan kicked the car window and turned to look at her. If you want to live, come and help me open the car window. Su Shuai shrank her neck. She didn't believe Jin Wan at all. The banging sound in the car made her even more panicked. Suddenly, she saw the fruit knife abandoned on the ground, picked it up, and pointed it at Jin Wan again. If you don't stop the car quickly, I'll kill you now. Jin Wan glanced at her coldly and grabbed the fruit knife. Ignoring Su Shuai's increasingly panicked and crazed eyes, she got up, put the fruit knife in the gap between the car window and the car door, and then smashed it with her high heels. Su Shuai's eyes were cold. The car window was too strong. No wonder the other party had specially bought a new car to set up such a big conspiracy. All the windows of the new car basically had a smash-proof function. Jin Wan gritted her teeth and pulled out the metal bar on the passenger seat to knock on the window as she and Mo Jingxian had done when they had escaped underwater. The car window was damaged one after another, and finally there was a gap. Jin Wan slashed it again, cut open the seal with a fruit knife, and smashed it with her shoe until the whole car window was broken and fell down. Jin Wan lay on the car window and observed the wasteland on both sides of the highway. Ahead of her was a sunken hill. There was no water, and it was barren. She didn't know where it was. At a speed of 150 miles per hour, the moment the car window was opened, a gust of wind rushed in. Jin Wan narrowed her eyes and looked around. Suddenly she turned and said, Su Shuai, come here. Su Shuai's face was filled with fear as the strong wind blew in, and she shook her head vigorously. Jin Wan lost her patience and reached out to tug at her. Your cousin wants to harm you. Are you really going to let her have her way? Although we might get hurt, we have to jump to survive. Jump. I don't want it. I'll definitely die if I jump at this speed. You really want to harm me? Su Shui screamed and pushed her. Jinwan tugged her hard. Since she couldn't reason with her, she had to use force. Just as the two of them were fighting, Jinwan suddenly seemed to hear the sound of a siren. She turned her head abruptly and looked at the wires under the seat. The siren sounded frightening. She tightened her grip and pulled Su Shui to the open window. Jump. I don't want to jump. The two of them kept fighting, and Jinwan couldn't divert her attention to the huge truck that had been following this car. Su Shui was almost pushed out by Jinwan again and again. She didn't know where the brute force came from, but she suddenly grabbed Jinwan's neck and forced Jinwan to let go of her. Then she turned over and pressed Jinwan hard against the car door. Her eyes were red as she strangled Jinwan's neck and shouted, "If you want to die, die by yourself. Don't drag me. Go to hell, you." Jinwan was shocked to see the hatred in Su Shui's eyes. She wanted to wake her up, but her face was red and she couldn't speak. Just as she was about to be pushed out of the car window by Su Shui, half of Jinwan's body was exposed outside the window. Out of the corner of her eye, she finally saw the huge truck that had been following closely behind, and at the same time, she saw the black Bentley speeding up behind it. Bentley? A black Bentley? At this angle and speed, she couldn't see the license plate clearly, but the model of the car was so familiar to her that she frowned hard. Just as she was distracted, Su Shui pushed her out with force. Jinwan's back brushed against the remaining glass fragments of the car window. The pain made her lose the strength to resist. The moment she was pushed out, with the inertia of the speeding car and the speed at which she was thrown, she felt as if she was flying for 2 seconds, and then fell heavily to the ground. At the moment of falling, Jinwan subconsciously covered her stomach with her hand, but her body rolled several times on the ground. Her limbs and bones were in so much pain that she almost lost consciousness. Almost at the same time, the huge truck rushed straight in her direction and even sped up. Hearing the sound, Jinwan raised her head with a jerk and looked at the huge truck that was about to rush towards her. The truck was coming straight for her. Even the escape route of jumping out of the car had been blocked. She didn't even have the last chance of survival. Despair and panic swamped her in an instant. At this critical moment, the black Bentley several meters behind the huge truck suddenly sped up. At the moment when Jinwan was about to be run over by the truck, the black Bentley rushed into her sight at an astonishing speed and decisively stood between her and the truck. Boom, there was a loud bang. In a trance, Jinwan seemed to see the license plate number of the black Bentley rushing over, and a string in her brain snapped with the loud crash. Don't! Jinwan's body was thrown to the side of the road by the impact of the two cars in front of her. After rolling several times, she couldn't control her body and hit hard against the safety fence on the side of the highway. She felt as if her abdomen was being torn apart, and waves of pain assaulted her. The cars in the rear slammed on the brakes one after another because of the terrible accident in front of them. With a series of breaking sounds, the world seemed to fall silent for an instant. Jinwan raised her eyes with some difficulty and looked at the black Bentley that was almost hit by the huge truck. Chapter 353. Jinwan's entire body trembled in pain. Her heart felt empty. She stared at the car, her hands struggling to crawl on the ground, but no matter how hard she tried, she could not move. The sharp, throbbing pain in her abdomen stimulated her nerves. Jinxian! In the distance there was a loud explosion. There was no need to guess to know that the car Su Shui was in had self-ignited and exploded. The fire and thick black smoke covered the sky with a layer of fog. The highway was suddenly quiet and suffocating, and the smell of death slowly penetrated Jinwan's skin. Her tense and disordered nerves cooled down bit by bit, but she felt cold and bone-chilling. Jinwan had never felt the sky was so gloomy. The black Bentley stopped there motionlessly, and the gasoline under the car sprang up a small fire. Jinwan stared at the fire, gritted her teeth, and tried desperately to crawl over to put out the fire. But after a long time, She only moved a few centimeters forward. Mrs. Mo. Feng Ling's voice followed. A lot of drivers had gathered behind the giant truck. She quickly pushed the crowd away and ran in. When she saw Jin Wan lying on the ground with red eyes, she rushed over. Feng Ling crouched down to help Jin Wan up. But Jin Wan kept staring at the black Bentley and said hoarsely, "Who is the person in the car? Let me help you up first." Feng Ling almost never cried. Now seeing Jin Wan's blank eyes and the blood oozing from her lower body, her eyes almost turned red. She stepped forward and tried to help her up. But Jin Wan couldn't even stand steadily and just kept staring at the car. "Tell me, who is the person in the car?" Feng Ling gritted her teeth and didn't speak. Jin Wan slowly turned her eyes to Feng Ling. "Is it Mo Jingshan?" Feng Ling grabbed her arm to prevent her from falling, but her hand holding her arm trembled slightly. She tried to comfort her, but she couldn't suppress her emotions at all. She lowered her eyes and whispered, "Mr. Mo, and we have tracked your location and chased you all the way. We were half an hour behind you and finally caught up with you as fast as we could. But just now, when we saw you being pushed out of the car window, Mr. Mo's car suddenly accelerated to the limit." Jin Wan's mind went blank for a moment. The person in the car was Mo Jingshan. The moment her consciousness stopped, Jin Wan suddenly pushed Feng Ling away, turned around, and staggered in the direction of the car. Feng Ling didn't expect that she still had the strength to push herself away, and stepped back. When she reached out to help her, Jin Wan had already rushed to the side of the black Bentley. She rushed forward to hold Jin Wan, who almost knelt on the ground, and held her arm tightly. "Mrs. Mo, don't do this." Jin Wan stared at the motionless Bentley in front of her, and couldn't hear anything. Nanheng, who rushed into the crowd almost at the same time as Feng Ling, didn't say a word and directly asked Kay and the others to catch the driver of the giant truck. At the same time, a group of people were solemnly preparing to rescue him. The drivers around, and Ji and they pointed. "In. And did the car in front explode? Did you? Is it too scary?" "Look, the car and. Emoji said. "Shun. And she. Have a handshake, I to say. To say, and. The car is leaking oil. Look, the oil is on fire. Will this car explode too?" The whispers of the crowd couldn't reach Jin Wan's ears. She held back her tears and stared at the broken window with bloodshot eyes. She tried to push Feng Ling away, but Feng Ling still held her arm tightly and finally hugged Jin Wan with both hands. "Mrs. Mo, don't be impulsive. Let me go. Mrs. Mo. Feng Ling, let me go." Jin Wan screamed. "Let me go. This car may spontaneously combust at any time. Mr. Mo risked his life to rush here and block the way just to save your life. No matter what happens to Mr. Mo, if you don't leave now, won't Mr. Mo's sacrifice be in vain?" "Sacrifice what? How could he be sacrificed?" "He won't." Jin Wan struggled crazily in her arms and finally couldn't move. Hearing the sound of Nan Heng and Feng Ling trying to open the door, she couldn't hold back her tears and knelt to the ground powerlessly. "Jin Wan." Feng Ling couldn't help calling her name. She lowered her head and saw Jin Wan's trembling and twitching shoulders. She held her shoulders and said calmly, "Your lower body is covered with blood. Get in the car first." "Jin Wan, don't be like this." Seeing the fire on the gasoline under the car getting bigger and bigger, Jin Wan wanted to go up and put it out. Nanheng suddenly looked at Jin Wan and said seriously, "Feng Ling, take Jin Wan away immediately." It was necessary to take Jin Wan away. With Nanheng's order, Feng Ling forced Jin Wan up from the ground, put her arms around her shoulders, and took her hand. "Let's go." Jin Wan didn't speak or move. She just stared at the black Bentley and watched the blood spreading out along the door. She felt dizzy. "Mo Jingshan, come out, come out." Jin Wan's mind was blank. She unconsciously walked to the car door, but was held down by Feng Ling. She stared blankly at the deformed car door. "The airbag of a Bentley is better than that of many cars. He'll be fine, right?" Jin Wan seemed to be talking to Feng Ling, but also seemed to be talking to the person in the car, and more like talking to herself. Feng Ling didn't say anything. No matter how good the car was, it was driven at the limit of its speed. If it was an ordinary car at this speed, it would have been smashed into pieces in an instant. The huge impact was not something a normal person could bear. Besides, Mr. Mo drove the car horizontally, and the side of the car was hit. The defense of the side was not as strong as that of the front and back of the car, so the situation inside the car was obviously no better than outside. It could only be worse than what they saw. At the moment when Jinwan was almost crushed to death by the giant truck, Mr. Mo used his life to exchange for Jinwan's. Just now, when he suddenly drove the car to the limit, no one could see this scene. Even though Feng Ling had been through fire and water for so many years, and was used to death, she still couldn't forget the scene just now. Feng Ling held Jinwan's hand, pulled her over, and was about to take her away. In fact, Jinwan didn't have much strength, and the red and sticky lower body made her realize what she had lost at this moment. Why did this happen? Why did it suddenly become like this? Chapter 354. Feng Ling forcibly took Jinwan back to the black SUV not far behind. As soon as she opened the door, there was a sudden noise. It sounded like the deformed car door was finally opened. Hearing the noise, Jinwan froze, turned her eyes in that direction with a jerk, and turned to walk back. Jinwan, don't go over there. Mo Jingshan is there. I heard them open the car door. Feng Ling held her, and didn't let her move. In this situation, Mr. Mo was probably covered in blood. If Jinwan went over in this state, she would probably suffer a big blow. Feng Ling, let me go over. Jinwan, I beg you. Jinwan finally could not hold it in any longer. She choked with sobs, and large drops of tears rolled down her battered and bloodstained face. She stared stubbornly in that direction. Let me go see him. I want to go see him. Feng Ling made up her mind and pulled Jinwan back with force. Jinwan's whole body bumped into her arms. Feng Ling was about to help her into the car, when Jinwan's whole body suddenly softened, and she fell down. Jinwan! Feng Ling was startled, and rushed to hold her steady. Fearing that something really happened to her, she helped her into the car. When she looked down and saw the blood on Jinwan's lower body, she hurriedly took off her black coat, and wrapped it around her lower body. Then she quickly contacted the nearest rescue team and emergency center. Feng Ling watched Jinwan being pushed out of the car. A normal person would be hurt after being pushed out of a car at such a speed, let alone Jinwan's stomach. Feng Ling didn't dare to think anymore. She held the phone in one hand, and held Jinwan's hand tightly with the other, but only felt a bone-chilling coldness. Jinwan's blood seemed to be frozen. From her hands to her face to her neck, she was cold everywhere. She was still frowning in her coma, and murmuring indistinctly. Listening carefully, she seemed to be calling Mo Jingshan's name. When Jinwan woke up, she thought she just had a nightmare, but as soon as she moved, she felt pain all over, as if all her bones and flesh had been taken apart and reassembled. For a moment, she almost suspected that her rebirth was fake. Perhaps she had just returned to the despair and pain 10 years later. She stared blankly at the snow-white walls and ceiling of the hospital. After a long time, she slowly turned her eyes to look around. Hospital again. But it was an intensive care unit. She felt as if there were 2 fixed tubes delivering oxygen to her nose. She felt as if there was something clamped on her fingers. There were several medical instruments around her, and from time to time, beeping sounds could be heard. Jinwan opened her eyes and closed them again. After a moment, she opened them again. The nightmare-like experience on the highway lingered in her mind. She wanted to treat it all as a nightmare, but the faint pain in her stomach, and the 4 drip on the back of her hand, told her the cruelest truth. If the child was still there, the doctor would not have given her an injection. The ward was very quiet. Jinwan didn't move. She didn't have the strength to move. She silently digested all this, and her heart and abdomen seemed to ache at the same time. She had a dream just now. She dreamed that Mo Jingshan took her to the upper reaches of the Los Angeles River. She dreamed that Mo Nwan's studio was officially listed in High City, and became a joint stock real estate company. She dreamed that she and Mo Jingshan appeared together at the Domestic Business Managers Conference. She dreamed that they stood side by side, and she was by his side, becoming the best version of herself. But when she opened her eyes, she found that she was surrounded by a cold and pale ward. There was no one around. This was a sterile ward. Only doctors in sterile clothes could enter. Jinwan lay quietly alone. Seeing the doctor come in and check her body by the bedside, he found that Jinwan had woken up. The doctor put his gloved hand on her forehead and said to her in English as if comforting her, "Miss G, although I know this may be cruel to you, we must apologize to tell you that the child was not saved. It was not easy for an adult to survive such a huge fall and impact. You have been unconscious here for 5 days and successfully passed the critical period. After 2 more days of observation, you can be transferred to a general ward." Jinwan looked at the doctor silently and blinked gently, indicating that she had heard him. The doctor had seen many women who went crazy or emotional after suffering a major accident. But Jinwan was very quiet and motionless. She slowly closed her eyes and was very calm. But she was so calm that it made his heart ache. The doctor always liked patients who were so cooperative. Seeing that she was too calm and quiet, he said to her patiently, "It was our best medical team who performed the surgery for you. Please rest assured that your fertility was not affected. After you recover, you can have another child. The 2-month-old child is just a small embryo. Don't be too sad. Your injury is really serious. Falling at that speed is equivalent to falling from at least 4 or 5 floors. You are lucky to be alive. You will continue to have everything in the future. Rest well and recover." Jinwan closed her eyes silently and nodded slowly and weakly. 2 days later, as the doctor said, Jinwan could be transferred from the ICU to a general ward. Jinwan was still sleeping when she was transferred to the ward. When she woke up, she was already lying on the bed. Feng Ling pushed the door open and saw that Jinwan was lying there motionless with her eyes open, looking at the ceiling of the ward. She walked in. "Madam Emo came just now, but you were still sleeping." "She personally made chicken soup for you to nourish your body." With that, Feng Ling came over and opened a white thermos flask by the bed. The fragrance from it instantly wafted out. Jinwan had been unconscious for 5 days and had been in the ICU with an oxygen tube for 2 days. She hadn't spoken for a week. When she smelled the fragrance, her chapped lips moved. She wanted to speak, but her voice was too hoarse. "Where is Emo Jingshan?" Jinwan asked where Emo Jingshan was, not how he was now. If the answer was that he was still in the hospital, it meant that at least he was still alive. If the answer was not in the hospital, Jinwan didn't dare to think further. She turned to look at Feng Ling, who was helping her to ladle the chicken soup. "Answer me." Feng Ling ladled the chicken soup out and gently stirred it in the bowl with a spoon to make the soup less hot. While stirring, she said, "The body and the interior of the car were seriously deformed. Mr. Mo's driver's seat was too narrow. When his head was hit, a steel bar in the car pierced Mr. Mo's cervical vertebra and spine, and another one directly penetrated his shoulder." Jinwan's hands on her sides instantly clenched, and her body was cold. Chapter 355. Feng Ling came over and shook the head of Jinwan's bed, trying to feed her soup. Jinwan didn't open her mouth, but looked silently at the door. After a long silence, she asked, "His cervical spine and spinal nerves were injured. Will he wake up?" Feng Ling tightened her grip on the spoon. Although Jinwan was not a medical student, she certainly knew the most basic human knowledge. The spine and cervical spine were both key parts of the brain. Even if Mr. Mo's vital organs were not injured, it was a miracle that he could survive such a serious car accident. But judging from the fact that he had been in a coma for 7 days and was still in danger, it was unknown whether he could wake up or not. The doctor had said that there was only a 30% chance that Mr. Mo could survive. If he couldn't hold on, the result of the treatment was likely to be a coma. But she couldn't tell Jinwan this at all. But now even if she didn't say it, Jinwan could guess it. Feng Ling was silent for a moment, sat by the bed, and put the bowl to her mouth. "Mrs. Mo has been in the hospital these days. She made this soup and brought it to you. Drink some first." Mrs. Mo. Jean Wan looked at the chicken soup in the bowl. Sure enough, Ms. Wanzhu's cooking skills were really good. She could smell the soup just like a chef. She couldn't imagine how Wanzhu felt when she endured the pain of losing her son and the pain of her daughter-in-law's miscarriage, and insisted on making soup for her. Drink some. Mrs. Mo's pain and worry are no less than yours, but she is really strong. For Mr. Mo's sake, you have to hold on, especially you. Now you have to take good care of your body. And if you drink this soup, Mrs. Mo will feel better. Jean Wan obediently took a sip. It was indeed delicious. It was light but not tasteless. How long will it take for him to pass the critical period? After a few sips, Jean Wan couldn't drink anymore and asked hoarsely. Knowing that she couldn't drink now, Feng Ling put the bowl aside and answered, I don't know. He still needs to be observed and treated. Dr. Qin has rushed here after receiving the news. Don't worry about the medical environment in the United States. As long as there is a glimmer of hope, they will use the best medicine and medical means to save Mr. Mo, since Feng Ling had said so. Even if Jean Wan's heart was falling apart, she could only keep calm on the surface. They didn't want her to be too sad. It was unnecessary for her to be sad now. The only thing she could do was not to let them worry about her. After another week, Mo Jingshan was still in a coma. There were even a few times when he was critically ill, but was saved in an emergency. During this period, Jean Wan couldn't sleep well every night. As long as she closed her eyes, she would see the scene of the black Bentley rushing over in front of her. The loud crash and the soaring shock woke her up again and again, and then she couldn't sleep anymore. These days, the news she learned from Feng Ling was that Su Shui died in the car with the spontaneous combustion system. When the Los Angeles police came to investigate, they did presume that Su Shui had some grudges with Jean Wan, and because of her emotional instability, she wanted to die with Jean Wan. But in the end, she died in the exploding car. When the police went to the Su family to collect evidence, Elder Su and Su Jilan didn't say much. Only Su Jilan told the media that Su Shui was her closest cousin, and she didn't expect her to be so crazy that she would go to such extremes as dying with others, one by one. The responsibility was piled on Su Shui. Dead men tell no tales. Although this case was not closed hastily, the police had basically confirmed this situation, so they did not continue to search for the truth so seriously. Even if Jean Wan wanted to confront Su Jilan now, she couldn't go out of the hospital, and Mo Jingshan hadn't woken up. She didn't have the energy to identify or accuse Su Shui. After all, she didn't have any evidence. Su Jilan really made use of Su Shui. Everything was so natural that even the police with a keen sense of smell didn't notice anything wrong. But Jean Wan wouldn't let go of the murderer who caused her miscarriage. Time passed day by day. Jean Wan couldn't get up at first, but a few days later, she could walk around the ward, and half a month later, she could occasionally go to Mo Jingshan's ICU and stare blankly. There was no glass in this ward, so she couldn't see what was going on inside, or the people inside. She could only feel the man a few meters away from her through the wall, but somehow she felt he was so far away. Every day, the first thing Jean Wan asked when she woke up, "Is Mo Jingshan awake?" The answer she got was a shake of the head. Jean Wan couldn't imagine that he had been in a coma for nearly 20 days. But from the doctor's occasional conversations, she could tell that the worst result was that he would sleep forever. The winter nights in Los Angeles were really cold. Standing outside Mo Jingshan's ward, Jean Wan raised her hand and touched the cold wall. The light in the wall had been out for a long time, but she still refused to leave. She just wanted to stay here with him, waiting for him to wake up and open his eyes. After being separated by the wall for so many days, Jean Wan recalled her relationship with Mo Jingshan in her previous life. It was so simple for a person to disappear from life. Mo Jingshan disappeared so completely in those 10 years, just like now, silently and without a trace. Fate seemed to play a big joke on Jean Wan. She thought she had found back everything she had lost in her previous life, but now it seemed to be pulling away bit by bit. In her previous life, Mo Jingshan could return to China safely after 10 years. How could he stay in a coma now? 2 days later, Jean Wan squatted alone outside Mo Jingshan's ward in the middle of the night. She looked out of the window at the moonless night sky and waited for him to wake up longer and longer. When Jin-won was well enough to be discharged from the hospital, it had been a month since the car accident. Emo Jingshin had been in a coma for a month. 3 days ago, the doctor said that he had passed the critical period and his life had stabilized. But when would he wake up? Maybe tomorrow, or maybe never. Jin-won wanted to stay with him in the hospital, but Won-ju forced her to go back to the Emo family in Los Angeles. With Jin-won here, Won-ju felt that Emo Jingshin was also here. Seeing Jin-won, she felt at ease and didn't want Jin-won to be in a daze every day and night in the cold hospital. Lying in the bedroom where Emo Jingshin used to sleep, Jin-won called him 3 times a day, even though she knew his cell phone wasn't answered. Every time, his cell phone was turned off. Jin-won followed Won-ju to the hospital again, but she still couldn't enter the ward at will. She hadn't seen him for a month. Jin-won squatted in the corridor, holding her cell phone and texting Emo Jingshin. She only sent one sentence. Emo Jingshin, I'm scared. Dash. Chapter 356. The police had closed the case of Su Shui's death in the car. On the day the case was closed, the head of the police came to the hospital. Emo Xiaozi took the photos taken at the crime scene and saw the photos of Emo Jingshin's smashed black Bentley. He negotiated with the police about these photos and asked the truck driver's confession. Jin-won walked past them, heard what they said, saw the stack of photos in Emo Xiaozi's hand, and saw the black smoke spreading from Su Shui's car after the fire was extinguished. She suddenly turned to look at Feng Ling, who had been following her. Come with me to the Su family. The Su family? Su Shui's home. Su Shui's parents were in charge of the Swan Group in Los Angeles, which was not to be underestimated. However, Su Shui's parents were obviously just honest businessmen and had never participated in the affairs of Elder Su and the Su family. When Jin-won arrived at the Su family, Su Shui's parents almost rushed up to strangle her when they saw her, saying that she killed their daughter. Feng Ling stopped Su Shui's parents expressionlessly, and with Feng Ling's cooperation, Jin-won entered the Su family unimpeded. B*TCH. Our Shui has been killed because of you. What are you doing here? Get out of here. We don't welcome you here. Jin-won entered the door and heard the roar of Su Shui's parents. She stopped and looked back at them coldly. If you had been a little wary of the people closest to you, Su Shui wouldn't have ended up like this. She was killed because of me? Did she really die because of me? Su Shui's mother had been crying for a month and stared at her with swollen eyes and pale face. Su Shui's father, who was still rational, pointed at Jin-won and scolded. Our Shui was tortured to madness because of you. She barely survived, but in the end she died because of you. How dare you say she didn't die because of you? Jin-won turned around and no longer looked at them, and the faint trace of mockery in her eyes did not fall into their eyes. She just said lightly, I almost died in the hands of your daughter twice. Maybe I am indeed more fortunate than her. At least I don't have a sister who seems to be close to me, but actually wants to use me to harm me. Jin-won suddenly paused. Why not? Wasn't her previous life ruined in the hands of her good sister, Ji-min Gran? Therefore, the scariest thing in the world is never the enemy standing in the open, but the so-called closest person who plays with you every day and seems to be on the same side as you, but is always trying to push you into the abyss. What do you mean? What did Shui's death have to do with Jilan? We all know that Jilan and Shui grew up together. Don't think that just because Shui is dead, there's no evidence. Now you're still trying to point the finger at Jilan. You're still trying to sow discord at a time like this. Women are truly the most vicious. Father Su couldn't push Feng Ling away at all. After cursing for a long time, he could only be blocked by Feng Ling. Jin-won was expressionless. Based on Su Shui's suicidal behavior, the police concluded that she was the mastermind of the whole thing and hastily closed the case. As her parents, are you really willing to let your daughter bear the crime of attempted murder and self-immolation? Jin-won didn't look at them, but spoke while observing everything in the Su family, her voice cold and indifferent. Father Su and Mother Su's expressions changed slightly, and they stared at her. Where is the room where Su Shui used to live? Jinwan asked directly. Father Su hesitated, and looked at Jinwan's back suspiciously. When he was about to speak, Mother Su grabbed his arm with a broken look, and stopped him from speaking. You can't let her into our daughter's room. We can't let such a woman who killed Shui enter Shui's room. Jinwan abruptly turned her head, only to see Su Jingshan's mother's red eyes. For a moment, she thought of how Mo Jingshan's mother had not shed a single tear in front of her these days despite her depression. Jinwan paused and then said, Are you sure I killed Su Shui? Am I not one of the victims? Mother Su ignored her, and looked away with red eyes. Father Su pointed to the second floor. Second floor, the room with the white door. Jinwan withdrew her gaze, and turned to walk in. The Su family was not small. She walked up the stairs, and circled around on the second floor, before she found Su Shui's room. The servants of the Su family were surprised to see her, but no one dared to stop her. They just stood aside and looked strangely at the person who suddenly broke in. Jinwan walked into the bedroom that Su Shui used to live in. The room that was filled with the heart of a young girl had not changed, even though its owner had passed away. It was as though someone had insisted on cleaning it every day for the past month. Even the KT cat pillow on the bed appeared as though it had just been washed, and was neatly placed there. The room was filled with the smell of air freshener. Jinwan looked around, walked to the table in the room, and saw a delicate photo frame, in which the photo was a group photo of Su Shui and Su Jilan. She picked up the photo frame, turned it over, and opened it. When the photo fell out, she saw the words on the back, 200x taken in Japan. That was to say, Su Shui and Su Jilan had been to Japan a year ago, and Su Jilan was not locked up at home by Elder Su because of mania as people said. Relatively speaking, she was very free. On the table shelf were some simple items that were suitable for young girls. How could someone with the heart of a romantic young girl be so vicious and merciless as to run all the way to T-City to kidnap her? Jinwan opened the drawer under the table and asked the servant at the door, Did Su Shui have any contact with anyone other than her cousin when she was alive? The servant didn't know who Jinwan was and subconsciously answered. Before she went crazy, she had a good interpersonal relationship with her friends and classmates. But when she suddenly dropped out of school and said she was going to study in China, she only kept in touch with Miss Su Jilan. At this time, Jinwan's hand paused in the drawer. She looked at the bottles of medicine in it, picked them up, opened them, put them to her nose and sniffed them. Suddenly, her eyes were cold, and she covered the bottles again and held them in her palm. She continued to rummage through the other things in the drawer and asked, Did Su Jilan also send these medicines? You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.